with a hollow sound like a huge slide whistle. "Whoa!" said little William, with his eyes wide. Lily laughed. But at that moment, Ned shouted, "Jesus!" and jammed on the Explorer's brakes. As the SUV slewed to one side, Lily could see that there was a figure standing in the middle of the highway, only 20 yards in front of them. It looked like a man, but it was taller than a man, and it juddered and jumped like an image from an old black-and-white movie. Lily glimpsed a stretched open mouth, and sightless black eyes, and arms that looked jointed in all the wrong ways, but then it turned away and disappeared altogether. The Explorer's tires slithered on the road surface as Ned tried to bring it under control. Tasha was screaming, and Agnes was twisting around in her seat, trying to make sure that little William was firmly buckled up. They spun round almost 360 degrees before Ned managed to bring the Explorer to a stop. They were overtaken by a huge truck, its headlights ablaze and its klaxon blaring like a passing train. "Did you see that?" said Ned. "Did you see that guy? Right in the middle of the goddamn highway, like he had a goddamn death wish or something." Lily tugged at the shoulder of his windbreaker. "Ned, let's get out of here right now." Ned looked around, increasingly frantic. "Did I hit him? I didn't feel anything, did you? I don't think I hit him. Where the hell is he? He was standing right in the middle of the goddamn highway. Ned, let's go. I don't think there was anybody there. It was like a mirage. But what if I hit him? I can't just leave him lying in the road." Another car came to a halt behind them, flashing its lights and sounding its horn, then another and another and another. "Please, Ned, let's get moving," Lily urged him. "It's really dangerous stopping on the highway like this. There was nobody there, I promise you. It was just your headlights shining on the snow." Ned switched on his emergency flashers. "I'll pull over. I need to get out and take a look." "Honey," said Agnes, "I think that Lily's right, and we should go. I didn't feel you hit anything." "I saw the guy, hon. Don't tell me you didn't." "Ned!" Lily shouted at him. "Will you please just hit the gas and get us the fuck out of here?" Ned turned around, blinking in surprise. "Come on, Lily. We got young kids with us here. No need to use language like that." Lily was about to shout at him again when they were deafened by a sharp, explosive blast like escaping steam. The Explorer began to vibrate as if they were driving at high speed over a plank road, and then it started to shake wildly from side to side until it was thumping and banging on its suspension. Agnes and Tasha and Sammy all shrieked in terror. Ned let out a deep, frightened, "Whoa! Make it stop!" Tasha cried out. "Make it stop!" "What's happening?" said Agnes. "Ned, what's happening?" Ned was grappling with the gear shift. I don't know. I can't make it." But the hissing was so intense now that his words were swallowed, and it kept on growing louder and louder until Lily found it almost impossible to think. "Ned!" she shouted, but he couldn't hear her. "Ned!" Through the undersides of the doors, lights began to stream in, narrow, criss-crossing lights, which shifted and altered, forming themselves into all kinds of distorted shapes. Even though she was being shaken so violently from side to side, Lily could see strange, attenuated faces sliding diagonally across the Explorer's floor and up the back of the seats in front of her. Faces and slowly opening limbs and what could have been branches or antlers. She tried to lean forward and shout at Ned again, but she was slammed back so hard that her neck was whiplashed. "Ned, the doors! Unlock the doors!" Still Ned didn't hear her. She had to grip the grab handle with both hands to stop herself from being jolted against the door on one side and William's baby seat on the other. All she could think of was, "Please don't hurt my children. Please don't hurt my family." "Stop!" Lily screamed out. "Wendigo, stop!" But if the apparition could hear her or understand her, it showed no signs of it. "Stop! I'll stay here. I'll do whatever George wants me to do." A rhomboid-shaped light shuddered across the glove box and then rose up in front of Agnes like a hologram, reassembling itself into a canine head. Two long arms unfolded themselves on either side of it, and then the head began to rise higher and higher leaning over Agnes at an angle. At the same time, it changed itself into a human face, which stared at Agnes with a terrible, expressionless detachment. "Stop! I'll get the land for him. I promise." Agnes shrank down in her seat, raising her hand to protect herself. But the scissor-like arms caught her around the neck and yanked her straight up again. She turned toward Ned, with her eyes bulging. Ned shouted something that Lily couldn't hear. He pulled at one of the arms and tried to twist Agnes free, but then the figure somersaulted backward, straight through the explorer's windshield, which exploded into thousands of sparkling fragments. Agnes was wrenched out of her seat and into the snowstorm. She literally flew away into the air as if she had been shot from a cannon. At least half of her did. Her seatbelt kept her hips and her legs firmly in place, and only her head and her arms and her torso disappeared, with long strings of bloody intestines unraveling behind her. Immediately the explorer stopped bucking up and down, and the hissing died away. The only sounds were William's sobbing and the impatient beeping of car horns. Ned turned around to Lily, and his face was gray with shock. "Ned, get us out of here," Lily begged him. "Agnes," said Ned. "Oh my God, Agnes." "Ned, for Christ's sake, put your foot down and go." But Ned started to unfasten his seatbelt. "She's out there, Lily. I can't just leave her. She's dead, Ned. You have to go." Ned opened his door, but as he did so, something landed on the explorer's hood with a resonant thump. Tasha screamed. Lily saw a creature on the hood that could have been a giant spider if it hadn't been made of nothing but light and shadow and optical illusions. It had a huge head with an oversized human face, but the head peeled open to reveal a smaller face, more like a slippery, hairless dog. Ned tried to scramble out of his seat, but two arms jabbed in through the shattered windshield and seized him by the shoulders. He was dragged out of the Explorer with such force that one of his boots caught in the steering wheel. There was a crackling noise like a turkey leg being twisted, and his foot was pulled off at the ankle joint. With his arms and legs tumbling across the hood, Ned was pulled up into the air. Lily heard him screaming, but then there was another explosive hiss, and he vanished into the whirling snow, in the same way that Agnes had vanished. It happened so fast that Lily was left with her hand still raised to shake Ned's shoulder, and her mouth still open. She turned to the children. Tasha and Sammy were staring at her in disbelief, both of them stunned into silence. William was still crying, his cheeks bright red and his little face bewildered. "We have to get out of here," said Lily. "What was that?" Tasha asked her, and her voice was quaking with absolute dread. "Mommy, what was that?" Lily unfastened her seatbelt, reached over to the driver's seat, and pressed the central locking switch. "Come on, we're going. And when you get outside, run." Tasha and Sammy opened the Explorer's door and almost fell out onto the highway. A long line of traffic had been building up behind them, and there was an irritable chorus of horns, but so far nobody had climbed out of their vehicle to find out what was wrong. Lily was finding it almost impossible to extricate William from his car seat. He was wearing a thick corduroy romper suit, and his straps were held in place by 4 fiddly buckles. She turned around to see where Tasha and Sammy were. They had run a short distance away, but now they had stopped and were waiting for her. She opened her door and called out, "Run! But watch out for the traffic!" William's seatbelt buckles had jammed solid, and she was jiggling them in frustration. "Come on, you stupid damn car seat!" William started to cry even louder, a high, distressed piping that made Lily feel even more panicky. She was still struggling when there was a thunderous bang on the Explorer's roof, and the whole vehicle shook. "No!" she shouted. "I'll give him the land! I swear it!" But the roof began to buckle and slowly come downward. With a whole cacophony of bangs and groans and warping noises, the entire vehicle started to crumple. Lily was forced to slide off her seat and kneel on the floor. She took hold of the sides of William's car seat and tried to shake it free from its mountings, but it wouldn't budge. With another groan, the Explorer's roof came down as far as the headrests, and the sides started to fold in too. Lily was forced to crouch down in the footwell, but still she couldn't get William free. The roof pressed down on the top of his car seat and started to tilt it forward. William was crying so hysterically that he could hardly breathe. It was then that Lily realized that she couldn't save him, and that the frame of the open door had been pressed down so far that she only had a few seconds to crawl out of the last remaining space. She heard somebody shout, "Come on, lady! You have to get yourself out of there!" She managed to twist herself around, and two buckskin-gloved hands reached into the Explorer and firmly grasped her wrists. "There's a baby in here!" she screamed. "There's a baby in here! You have to save him!" But there was nothing she could do. She was dragged out into the snow and helped up onto her feet, just as the Explorer was crushed up into a tangled sculpture of twisted doors and distorted seats. The noise of protesting metal was deafening, like a car crash in slow motion. 6 or 7 men had left their cars to see what was happening, and more were approaching through the snow. The man who had rescued Lily was a tall, rangy truck driver in a thick plaid jacket. "Anybody called 911? He called out. "Listen, there's a kid inside. Go get a couple of jacks. Maybe we can lift the roof up." "Damnedest thing I ever saw in my life," said another man. "How the hell does a vehicle get itself all scrunched up like that?" Lily begged, "Please, see if you can get William out of there. I can't hear him crying. Can anybody hear him crying?" She leaned against the crumpled-up side of the Explorer and shouted, "William! William!" But she couldn't hear anything, except the swish, swish, swish of passing traffic and the sporadic blaring of horns. She stood up straight again and looked around, and she felt as if she were going mad with grief. There was no sign of the Wendigo anywhere, no dimly shifting light, no shapes, no faces. She didn't even have a mirage to scream at. Tasha and Sammy came up to her, accompanied by a gray-haired couple in matching green padded coats. Both children looked stricken. "Mommy," said Tasha, "is William dead too?" I don't know. These men are going to try to get him out." "Anything we can do?" asked the gray-haired man. "Did you crash or something?" asked the gray-haired woman, looking at the crushed Explorer in disbelief. The man said, "Your kids came running up to us and said that you was attacked by some kind of animal." "Never saw no animal that could do nothing like that. Not even your full-grown moose." I don't know," said Lily. She couldn't think what else to say. She could hear sirens warbling and honking in the near distance. "Please, I think I have to sit down." She was still sitting in the back of the gray-haired couple's Buick when 2 highway patrol officers came up to her, a man and a woman. The woman climbed into the car beside her. She had orange-tinted glasses, and she smelled of breath mints. "How are you feeling?" she asked. "We'll have the paramedics take you and your children to the hospital in a couple of minutes." "We're fine. The 3 of us, we didn't get hurt. It was only my sister and my brother-in-law and my little nephew." "Well, that's what I need to ask you about. You said your nephew was in the vehicle, but all we could find was a child's car seat." What do you mean?" "There was a child's car seat in the vehicle, but there was no child in it." "I don't understand. I was trying to get him out, but I couldn't. The buckles were stuck fast." "Are you absolutely sure about that?" "Of course I'm sure. How can he not be there?" "Well, ma'am, we've searched the whole area, and there's no trace of him anywhere." "Oh, God," said Lily. "What about the others? What about my sister and my brother-in-law?" The male highway patrol officer said, "We found some remains, ma'am. Looks like they both went clear through the windshield when you crashed." He paused, and then he said, "What we can't work out, though, is what the heck you guys hit." Chapter 13. They returned home late in the afternoon, as it was growing dark. Tasha ran straight up to her bedroom and closed the door, but Sammy tagged around after Lily wherever she went, from the kitchen to the living room and back again, sucking his thumb like he used to when he was 3 years old and saying nothing. Lily was relieved to find that the crime scene investigators had swept all of the ashes out of the living room grate. She laid a new fire with crumpled-up copies of the Star Tribune and a little teepee of dry pine kindling, and soon had it crackling into life. "Are you hungry?" she asked Sammy. He shook his head, but she went into the kitchen anyway and opened up a can of tomato soup. She was pretty sure that there was no hope of them flying to France now. The Wendigo wouldn't let them go. George Iron Walker wouldn't let them go. He wanted his land, and he was obviously going to pursue her until she gave it to him. She called John Shook's number. He didn't answer, but she left him a message. "Tell George Iron Walker to call it off. I'll get his land for him one way or another, I promise. Meet me at my house tomorrow, around 3. She was shaking, but she managed to restrain herself from telling Shooks how she really felt. She was so grief-stricken for Agnes and Ned and little William that she felt as if somebody had their hands around her throat and was trying to choke her. She was terrified, too, that the Wendigo might come after them here. But more than that, she felt deeply burning fury, like nothing she had ever experienced before. She was determined to show George Iron Walker that she was not going to allow him to massacre her family and escape without being punished for it. She called Ned's parents, John and Matilda. 2 women from the Children's Welfare Services had picked up Petra and Jamie from school and driven them to Shingle Creek so that their grandpa and their grandma could take care of them. Matilda said, "Poor kids. They've been sobbing their hearts out ever since they got here." All that Petra and Jamie had been told so far was that their parents had died in a highway accident and that their little brother was missing, although they had to be prepared for the probability that he was dead too. As Lily was stirring the soup, a picture of the crushed explorer was flashed up on the local TV news, but Sammy was sitting with his head resting listlessly on the table, and she was able to reach the remote and switch channels before he saw it. She had taken the phone off the hook, too, because she guessed that reporters would be calling, as well as friends and well-wishers. This evening, they needed nothing but warmth, togetherness, and peace. Tasha appeared in the kitchen doorway. Her cheeks were still blotchy with tears. "Tasha?" When she spoke, Tasha's voice was trembly but accusing. "You know what it was, don't you, Mommy? That thing that killed Aunt Agnes and Uncle Ned." Sammy took his thumb out of his mouth. "I saw its face. It had 2 faces. It was like a dog. Then it was like a horrible man." Lily switched off the soup. "I do know what it was, yes. It was trying to stop us from reaching the airport." "Is it a ghost?" asked Sammy. "In a way, yes. A kind of a ghost. When your daddy took you away, we couldn't find you anywhere, so I asked this ghost to go looking for you." "You did what?" As simply as she could, she told them about John Shooks and George Iron Walker and Hazawin, and how she had asked them to summon up the Wendigo. "I don't believe you," said Tasha. "There's no such thing as a Wendigo. How can there be?" "Yes, there is, Tasha. You saw it for yourself. You saw what it can do. I'm so sorry for what's happened. You don't have any idea. I wish to the bottom of my heart that I'd never heard about it. Even if I had never been able to find you again, at least your father would still be alive, and so would Aunt Agnes and Uncle Ned and little William. But if it's true, why haven't you told the police?" "I could. But do you think that they'd believe me? George Iron Walker would say that I was making it all up, and he'd still send the Wendigo after us. There's only one way out of this, sweetheart, and that's for me to give him his piece of land." Tasha sat down next to Sammy. "It's like having a nightmare," she said. "I keep thinking that I'm going to wake up and none of it ever happened." Sammy declared, "I'm never going to go to sleep ever again." As it was, they all slept until well past 8 the next morning. During the night it had been snowing again, and the neighborhood was eerily muffled. "I'm going to see Philip Krausman this morning," said Lily, as she poured out their Lucky Charms. "Benny might have been too scared to ask him for that land, but I'm not." "You're not going to leave us here alone?" asked Tasha. "I'm not going to leave you alone for a single second, sweetheart. Not until this is all over." Tasha and Sammy were still eating their cereal when the doorbell chimed. Standing on the doorstep, stamping their feet, were Special Agents Rylance and Kellogg and Dr. Flores, too. "Oh, my God," she said. "Have you found William?" "Not yet, I'm afraid," said Special Agent Rylance. "But the police have more than 100 officers and deputies out looking for him, as well as who knows how many volunteers. Is it okay if we come in? We asked Dr. Flores to come along, in case we need to talk to the kids." "Okay. Can I offer you some coffee?" No, thanks. We really need to discuss 1 or 2 things with you. We have to get some kind of perspective on this." Lily took them into the living room. "I hope you're not going to take long. Tasha and Sammy are very upset." "Well, that's understandable," said Special Agent Rylance. "But the thing of it is, there have now been 4 or possibly 5 deaths associated with you and your children, not to mention the killing of your dog. All of these deaths have been brutal in the extreme, involving violent dismemberment and the disappearance of body parts. Not only that, all of them have occurred in circumstances that are not only inexplicable, but at first sight downright impossible." Special Agent Kellogg tugged off his black knitted hat. "We've had a preliminary report from the State Highway Patrol technicians, and they're of the opinion that the vehicle you were traveling in yesterday was not involved in any kind of moving collision, either with another vehicle or an animal or any roadside structure or traffic sign. They said that the damage could only have been caused by something similar to an automobile crusher of the type used in commercial scrapyards. Except that your brother-in-law's vehicle was right slap bang in the middle of I-35W, and the nearest commercial scrapyards are in Frogtown and St. Paul." "I don't know what happened," said Lily. "The vehicle just collapsed." "But then there's also the question of the human remains," said Special Agent Rylance. Lily thought that he was looking very old today, and very tired, with flat, papery wrinkles under his eyes. "I don't want to disturb you by going into too much detail, but your sister and your brother-in-law were taken apart in much the same way as your late husband and the man who was killed at the Flame office. What little we found of them was strewn along the highway and across nearby fields. We found your sister's left hand caught on a razor wire fence more than 2 miles away." Lily slowly sat down on the couch. She felt as if she were someone else altogether. "They went through the windshield," she said so quietly that Special Agent Rylance had to lean forward and say, "Excuse me?" "They went through the windshield. That's all I saw. But you'd agree that the way they died bears remarkable similarities to the way your former husband died? And this time we can't even blame seagulls or pelicans for carrying their remains away. Something flew off with them. And I mean flew, because we found no footprints in the snow around your brother-in-law's vehicle, and no footprints or snowmobile tracks across the fields. Whatever took them, Mrs. Blake, it must have carried them through the air." "I can't think what it could have been. A crow of some kind? I just don't know." "A crow," repeated Special Agent Rylance, clearly unconvinced. Special Agent Kellogg sat down beside her. "You told the officers on protection duty that you were going shopping to Calhoun Square. Can you explain what you were doing heading southward on I-35W in the opposite direction?" "We changed our minds." We decided to go to the Mall of America instead. Okay, then there's only one more thing we want to ask you about. You know that old barn you took us to at Sibley's End? Lily looked at him warily. That barn fell down about a week ago. Well, fell down isn't quite accurate. At first, the city council thought it was simply the weight of snow on the roof, but a local conservationist who examined the site said that the building had been literally ripped apart, forcibly disassembled joint by joint. Said he'd never seen anything like it. There was an article about it in the paper. I don't know what you want me to say. Special Agent Rylance said, All I want to know is, can you think of any way in which these events might be connected? I strongly believe that there is a connection. I believe that there's an explanation, too. But right now I'm darned if I know what it could possibly be. I wish I could help you. Yes, Mrs. Blake. I wish you could, too. Dr. Flores went into the kitchen and spent a few minutes with Tasha and Sammy, but when she came out again, she shook her head. I don't want to push them any further. They've seen more horrible things than most people see in a lifetime. Maybe I can come back in a few days' time. Sure, said Lily. The agents left. They said nothing more, but Lily had the uncomfortable feeling that they suspected her of knowing much more than she had been prepared to tell them, which of course was true. She told Tasha and Sammy to put on their sweaters and their coats, and they left the house. The sun had come out, and the snow was so bright that Lily had to put on her sunglasses. She went across the road to tell the protection officers where they were going, and then she climbed into her Rainier, and they headed for Adina. That woman asked her if we'd seen anything strange, said Tasha. So what did you tell her? I said no. We were too frightened to look. You could have told her the truth. No, she wouldn't have believed us, would she? Lily drove through the slushy streets to West 77th and parked outside the maroon brick offices of Krausman Developments, which stood on the curving corner with Park Lawn Avenue. Inside the reception area, with its glossy marble-effect floor and its potted yuccas, she went up to the receptionist and asked to see Philip Krausman. Tell him it's Lily Blake from Concord Realty. Just a social call, really. They sat and waited for 20 minutes on a curvy maroon couch, flicking through magazines and listening to syrupy interpretations of Frank Sinatra hits, until Philip Krausman came bustling down the stainless steel staircase. He was a short, bull-headed man with cropped silver hair, a bulbous nose, and a very deep suntan. He was wearing a shiny gray shirt with a shiny red necktie and gray pants that were 2 sizes too tight for him. Lily! Good to see ya. Sorry I kept you waiting. He grasped her hand and gave her a kiss on both cheeks. These are your kids? Tasha, Sammy, say hello to Mr. Krausman. Hi, Tasha. Hi, Sammy. They're great kids. You must be so pleased to have gotten them back. He took hold of Lily's arm and lowered his voice. I heard about the circumstances, and you have my condolences for that. Are the FBI any closer to finding out who did it? Not yet. They're not even sure if it was a who or a what. You mean some kind of an animal attack? Like an alligator? They don't know yet. Well, I'm still very sorry. Listen, I'm so glad you dropped by. But was there anything special you wanted to talk about? I'm pretty pushed for time right now. As a matter of fact, yes. Can you give me just 2 or 3 minutes? Okay. Do you want some coffee? Kids, how about a soda? Nancy, would you bring these 2 lovely young people a Dr. Pepper or something? Philip Krausman steered Lily to a couch underneath the staircase. So, what can I do for you? It's Mystery Lake. Mystery Lake? You bet, Mystery Lake. That whole development is going to make us a small fortune, believe me. My planners told me this morning that we can probably fit in at least 3 more units without in any way compromising that superior abode feeling. Subtly raise a couple of sightlines, trim a few inches off a driveway here and there. Well, that's terrific news, said Lily. but I've been doing some background research on Mystery Lake."
"Background research? Meaning what, exactly? Hey, you haven't found any soil pollution, have you? I don't want a repetition of that Boulder Bridge fiasco."
No. I'm talking about history. I wanted to give our potential buyers a feeling of time and heritage. I don't know, a feeling of continuity with the past. So many of these prestige communities feel the same, don't they? They're beautifully landscaped, they're very high-quality build, but they're isolated from their surroundings, not so much geographically as socially.
Lily, that's why people buy these properties. They want to be isolated from their surroundings. Socially, most of all.
But Mystery Lake used to be a Sioux encampment before they were all driven south of the river, and it was a very sacred place. Philip Krausman let out a sharp bark of amusement.
"Don't tell me it's going to turn out like that Poltergeist movie, and all the houses are going to collapse into some ancient Indian burial pit."
No, nothing like that. But that spit of land on the western side of the boat marina, where you're going to be constructing the jetty, that was the place where a great Native American god made his appearance and told the Duakanton that they would soon lose their lands to the white man. I was thinking that if Krausman Developments were to donate that spit of land to the Native American community as a kind of memorial, maybe if you put up some kind of plaque or statue or piece of sculpture, that would give Mystery Lake a real sense of magic.
Magic? Philip Krausman frowned at Lily as if the word completely baffled him. Magic?
Absolutely. It would create a fascinating feature on the lakeshore, a real talking point. But more than that, it would make you look like a developer who cares about local people and local culture. Philip Krausman thoughtfully squeezed his nose between finger and thumb.
"No,"
he said at last. It would make a really memorable promotion.
"No, you're wrong. It wouldn't. The kind of people who are going to buy property at Mystery Lake are not at all sympathetic to Native Americans. They associate them with alcoholism, drugs, gaming, and all kinds of antisocial behavior. Apart from that, why should anyone who's just paid $2.6 million want a constant reminder that the original owners of the land on which they're now sitting were forcibly dispossessed without any compensation, and even killed for it? You see, Lily, I do know a little local history.
But surely,
I'm sorry, Lily. The whole idea is very bad psychology. Apart from which, Krausman Developments do not, as a matter of principle, make donations of any kind to anybody. The only charity which Krausman Developments supports is Krausman Developments, i.e., me.
Philip, I believe that this could do you so much good. You've been thinking of standing for the city council, haven't you?
Philip Krausman shook his head. You can't change my mind, Lily. The answer is no.
She had promised Tasha and Sammy that she wouldn't leave them, but now she had no choice. She dropped them off 3 streets away at the home of one of Tasha's school friends, Maris Halverson, promising to pick them up again by 7 p.m. John Shooks was waiting outside her house in his old black Buick, wearing his fur hat and his sunglasses. As she turned into the driveway, he climbed out and approached her.
"Mr. Shooks," she said. "Oh, I think you can start calling me John, don't you?"
"All right, then." She glanced across the street at the protection officers. One of them was reading a newspaper, and the other was asleep with his cap over his face.
"Did you get it?"
asked Shooks as she unlocked her front door. "No.
Philip Krausman is adamant about it.
He doesn't make philanthropic donations of any kind, and in particular, he refuses to give that piece of land to the Duakanton."
"In that case, Lily, you're in very deep shit."
She closed the door,
went straight through to the living room and opened the whiskey decanter on the bureau. "Do you want one?" she asked him. "I've never been known to decline a drink. And you know why? Because there's no sure way of telling if it's going to be my last." She poured a large tumbler of Jack Daniels for each of them and sat in the button-back armchair close to the fire. "So what can I do now?" Sioux knocked back his whiskey in one. "Okay if I help myself to another? That might be my last, too." "Help yourself." She leaned forward and gave the fire a prod with the poker. "What do you think would happen if I killed him?" Sioux stopped in mid-pour. "You mean George?" "Yes. Supposing I went after him and shot him." "Jesus. I don't know. I guess you'd end up in Shakopee Women's Prison. At least it doesn't have a fence around it, and the food's supposed to be pretty good." "I'm asking you if the Wendigo would still come after me." "Oh, for sure. You see, George has already honored his promise to the Wendigo by giving him a human sacrifice or 3. And so the Wendigo will make darn sure that you honor your promise to George, even if you've blown George's brains out. And if you don't honor it, or can't, then you'll have to pay the price. It's a blood thing, a Native American thing. If you say you're going to give something to somebody, then you give it to them, no matter what, even if it's the most precious thing that you possess." "Maybe I could offer him an alternative piece of land?" "Do you have one?" "Not right now. But my friend Joan Sapke works part-time for the Minnesota Indian Affairs Council. She might be able to suggest someplace else. Someplace that still has some sacred connotations for the Dewa Canton, but doesn't happen to be right in the middle of a multi-million-dollar residential development." "I guess you could try. I can't think of any place offhand, but you could always suggest it." "You mean I should go talk to George?" Sioux gave a one-shouldered shrug. "What other way is there?" "That man slaughtered my sister and my brother-in-law and my 15-month-old nephew. It's as much as I can bear, knowing that he's still living and breathing. How can I talk to him?" "Because you have to." There was a very long silence between them. Then Sioux said, "Truly, Lily, you don't have any choice. The Wendigo will come for you sooner or later, and it'll find you, no matter where you try to run." Lily looked up at him. "So, will you come with me?" "I don't know, Lily. I don't want George to start thinking that I'm a white woman's pet poodle. There's a good chance that I'll need his help again in the future." "You'd ask him to raise up the Wendigo again? After everything that's happened?" "Lily, I'm not a judge, and I'm not a jury. I'm simply a guy who facilitates the finding of people that nobody else can find. Everything in life has to be paid for one way or another. But when you go to George Iron Walker, you know that people are going to get killed. Innocent people, some of them. How can you live with yourself?" "It isn't easy, Lily, believe me. But don't forget how you felt when Jeff took your kids away from you, and those Looney Tunes from Flame almost burned you to death. What I do, there's kind of a sort of justice to it, albeit a justice of the tooth and claw variety." "Oh, God," said Lily, "I really don't know what to do." John Sioux looked toward the window. Snow stopped. Sun's still shining. "I don't mind driving you to Black Crow Valley. That's if you're game to do a deal with the devil." When they arrived at George Iron Walker's house, however, there was no sign of him, nor of Hazowin. George's Subaru Forester was parked outside, and its hood was covered in snow, so it obviously hadn't been driven anywhere recently. But when Sioux rapped at the door, there was no reply. "George? It's John Sioux. Anybody home?" Still no answer. Sioux turned to Lily and said, "Maybe they're sleeping. Or high. Sometimes they smoke this bloodroot so that they can converse with the spirits or something. Makes you kind of horny, too. George? Sioux tried the door handle, and the door was unlocked. He stepped inside, and Lily cautiously followed him. The log fire was still smoldering in the hearth, and there were 2 half-empty coffee mugs on the table, so wherever George and Hazewin had gone to, they couldn't have been gone for very long. Sioux went into the kitchen, and then he looked into the bathroom and the bedroom. Then he went back out onto the veranda and hoarsely shouted, "George! Hazewin!" But there was no reply. Not even an echo. Only the faintest rustling of the wind among the pine trees and the furtive dropping of little clumps of snow. "This is strange," said Lily. "Where do you think they are?" "Went for a walk, maybe," said Sioux. "A walk? Well, you know what George is like. He enjoys, communing with nature." "Doesn't he have a cell phone?" "Sure, but I've never known him to answer it." They went back inside. "So what do we do now?" asked Lily. Sioux picked up a half-empty bottle of whiskey from the bureau and read the label. "We could wait, I guess. Or leave him a note and ask him to contact you." "I can't stay too long. Tasha and Sammy are expecting me home." "Okay then. We'll give him 30 minutes, and if he doesn't show by then, we'll head back to the city." He lifted the whiskey bottle. "Did you ever hear of Old Zebulon bourbon?" "Nope, neither did I." "Do you want some?" He went into the kitchen to find himself a glass. As he was coming back, however, Lily thought she heard something. A distant, high-pitched wailing. It was coming from outside somewhere, but the wind was blowing it down the chimney. "I can never get the measure of that George Iron Walker," Sioux was saying. "I can't decide if he's slicker than any white man or more native than any native." "Shh," said Lily, raising her hand. "Listen." Sioux stopped talking and listened, cocking his head to one side. "Sorry, I don't hear nothing." "No, there it is again. Like a small child crying." She opened the front door and went out onto the veranda. Although the wind was beginning to rise, she could hear it much more distinctly out here. It was definitely a child. She had the impression that it was coming from the forest off to their right, up the slope where Hazewin had summoned the Wendigo. "Yeah, I hear it now," said Sioux, swallowing whiskey. "Mind you, it could be nothing but a raccoon caught in a trap. Raccoons can sound a whole lot like babies when they're distressed." Lily said, "Shh." The crying went on and on, with occasional pauses for breath. "That's not a raccoon. That's a child. Not too far away, either." Sioux stared at her. "What are you thinking, Lily? You're not thinking the same as I'm thinking, are you?" "William," said Lily. Chapter 14. John Sioux said, "If the highway patrol couldn't find your sister's baby in the truck, or anywheres in the vicinity, then I guess it's possible the Wendigo took him." They were only halfway up the slope, toward the forest, but already he was seriously out of breath. Lily was 10 yards ahead of him, bounding through the knee-deep snow with her arms flailing to keep her balance. "Question is," John Sioux panted, "why did it take him?" "To put more pressure on me, that's my guess. George Iron Walker must have known that I'd come back here if I couldn't give him the land at Mystery Lake." They had reached the tree line now. Lily stopped again and listened. And now there was no question that a child was crying somewhere in the forest, less than 100 yards away. The crying was quavering and hysterical, interspersed with agonized gasps for breath. Lily was sure it was William. "William!" she shouted out. "William!" "Not too sure it's advisable for us to advertise our presence," said Sioux, catching up with her. "He wants that land," said Lily. "He may put pressure on me, but I don't think he'll hurt me while he still believes I can get it for him." Glad you're so confident about it." The crying seemed to be coming from the clearing where Hazewin had laid out her bones and her mirror. Lily pushed her way through the briars and the tangled branches until she came out in the open. The huge rock in the center of the clearing was covered in snow, and there was no sign of a child anywhere. Lily looked up. Above the tops of the pine trees, the sky was so intensely blue that it was almost purple. John Sioux joined her, tugging at a briar that had snagged his sleeve. He circled around the rock, and then he said, "It stopped." He was right. The forest was quiet again. Lily crossed over to the other side of the clearing and shouted, "William! Can you hear me? It's Lily! Call out if you can hear me!" Nothing. Only the wind and the nervous rattling of the branches. Sioux said, "Could have been a ghost voice. Hazowen can do stuff like that. Make you hear things that ain't really there. Kinda like ventriloquistics." "William," Lily persisted. "It's Aunt Lily. Where are you, William?" Still nothing. Sioux said, "Maybe we'd best get back to the house." "William!" Sioux took hold of her elbow. "Come on, Lily. I don't like this one iota, but we heard him. We both heard him. He must be here. I know we both heard him, but like I say, Hazowen can do things that'll make you believe that day is night or your dead grandpa's talking to you from inside your closet." Lily stayed where she was, straining to hear that crying again. She felt desperate. She knew that Sioux was probably right, and that George Iron Walker was tricking her, but she felt so guilty about what had happened to William that she couldn't bear to abandon him a second time, if there was any chance at all that he was here. "Come on, Lily," said Sioux more gently this time. "All right," she agreed, and allowed him to take hold of her arm and lead her back around the rock. As they reached the trees, however, she heard a sharp rustling noise, and then a quick pattering of feet. She turned around, and Sioux turned around too. There was another rustle, and the crackling of broken branches. Out of the trees, an enormous brindled wolf appeared, with shaggy fur and luminous yellow eyes. Its long gray tongue was lolling between its teeth, and its breath was smoking. It stood less than 30 feet away from them, staring at them. "Oh, shit," said Sioux. Lily heard more branches breaking off to her right. Another wolf appeared, long and gray, and then another and another. They came through the trees and stood in a circle like a gathering of ghosts. Lily guessed that there were more than a dozen of them. "This is seriously fucking awkward," Sioux told her. "You said that wolves didn't attack people." "Not so far as anybody knows." "What makes you think that these wolves are any different?" "These wolves set a trap for us, didn't they? What kind of a wolf can do that?" They waited. Lily's heart was thumping underneath her fur coat. She looked from one wolf to the other, trying to decide if they were going to go for them or not. The wolves kept their distance, endlessly panting, but not showing any signs of going away. "Let's try edging back toward the trees," Lily suggested. "Edging? A couple of steps at a time. No sudden moves. If wolves are frightened of humans, if they really don't attack people, then we should be okay." Sioux pulled a face. "Okay, I guess we can't stay here for the rest of the day." Lily took a cautious step to the left, and then another, and Sioux followed her. She reached the trees and pushed aside a branch with her upraised elbow. The branch snapped sharply, and instantly the brindled wolf trotted forward 2 or 3 paces, and all of the other wolves came nearer too. "Jesus," said Sioux. "Let's keep going," Lily urged him. "It looks like they're curious more than anything else. I mean, they would have gone for us by now, couldn't they, if they really wanted to kill us? Don't ask me. I'm not a wolf expert. Maybe they're just playing with their food." "I'll tell you what," said Lily. "We won't edge anymore. We'll simply start walking as fast as we can. We don't want to show them we're afraid." Sioux looked around them. The wolves were everywhere, their yellow eyes unblinking, long strings of saliva swinging from their jaws. "You're right," he said. "We might be filling our shorts in sheer terror, but we don't want to give them the satisfaction of knowing it, do we? Okay then, let's go." Lily took the first step, and then they began to walk away from the clearing as briskly as the briars would allow. Immediately the wolves began to follow them. On either side, Lily could see their long gray shapes flowing between the silver birches. Somehow they didn't seem like real wolves, more like the wolves that you would see in nightmares, weirdly misshapen. Sioux turned his head. "They're right behind us," he said between clenched teeth. "That big black and brown bastard, he's almost close enough to take a bite out of my ankle." Lily didn't look back. She was trying hard not to panic. She knew that fear was infectious, especially amongst animals. Dogs often attacked people because they could sense they were frightened of them. She had seen horses go berserk when they smelled human fear, and cattle collide with barbed wire fences. "Come on, John," she urged him. They started almost power walking, and then they started jogging. The wolves kept up with them, loping faster and faster. Lily glanced to her left, and she was sure that she glimpsed one of the wolves rise up onto its hind legs and start running like a man. It was then that she lost any sense of control and started to sprint. "Lily!" shouted Sioux. "For Christ's sake!" But now terror had taken over, and adrenaline was surging through her body, and all she wanted to do was get out of there alive. The wolves were chasing close behind her. She could hear their claws clattering over the briars. Sioux was yelling, "Lily! Lily!" But she knew what would happen if she stopped and turned back. She caught her ankle on a root and fell heavily sideways, jarring her shoulder against a rock. Sioux shouted, "Lily!" again. She looked up and saw the trees spinning. Then a huge furry body jumped on top of her, heavy and rancid and snarling, and she felt claws scrabbling against her right cheek. They tore right into her skin just beneath her eye, wrenching the flesh away from her cheekbone. She screamed, but she didn't know if she was screaming out loud. Her right cheek was clawed away from her face and thrown aside like a bloody piece of rag. Then a mouthful of crowded, razor-sharp teeth bit into the bridge of her nose with a crunch that penetrated her whole being. She couldn't breathe. She couldn't even shout out because it hurt so much. She could hear Sioux still screaming out, "Lily! Lily!" But there was nothing she could do to save him, because the gray wolves were already ripping at her clothes, tearing off her coat, and reducing her sweater to multicolored rags. The gray wolves worried the muscles from her thigh bones, tearing them downward with a crackling noise, and she experienced an agony so intense that she prayed that she would die then and there. Then they clawed their way into her stomach, tearing open the skin and the muscle and thrusting their snouts into her intestines. She could actually feel them doing it, gnawing at her ribs, and it made her jump and jump because her nerves were so sensitive. With horrified disbelief, she saw one of the wolves dragging out her intestines across the snow. They looked like red and yellow hosepipes. She could see blood everywhere, hers and John Sioux', although Sioux had been silent for a long time now, and she could only suppose that he was already dead. She let her head drop back onto the snow. The sky above her was still so blue. She realized that she was dead too, or as close to death as it was possible to be. The wolves had torn her to pieces, pulled her apart, and she was nothing more than the dying remnants of Lily Blake, the last dwindling spark of a woman who had once loved her family and her husband, and who now lay flat on her back in a forest in Minnesota, breathing her last few bubbling breaths. She reached across with her left hand, and she could feel her exposed ribcage and her lungs slippery and bloody but still inflating. "I should pray," she whispered. "Why?" said a man's voice. "I'm dying. I should say the Lord's Prayer, at least." "You're not dying." Lily opened her eyes. The sun was still shining between the trees. The birds were still twittering, and somebody was making a staccato tapping noise that sounded like a coded message. George Iron Walker was kneeling beside her, in his black leather coat. He wore a single silver earring that flashed in the sunlight. "You're not dying," he repeated. Lily lifted her head and looked down at her body. Her fur coat was still intact. She felt her face. Her face was still intact, too. What happened? George Iron Walker held out his hand. "Let me help you up." "I can get up myself, thank you." "What the hell happened? Where are the wolves?" "Wolves?" She stood up, though she tilted sideways and nearly lost her balance. She felt bruised and winded, as if she had been jostled and trampled by a panicking crowd. About 30 feet away, John Sioux was kneeling upright in the snow, angrily brushing his sleeves. "John," called Lily, "are you okay?" Sioux staggered to his feet and then took 2 hops toward her. "Me? I'm fucking terrific. I have a ton of snow all down the back of my neck and I've twisted my goddamn ankle. You can't see my Ray-Bans anywhere, can you? Lost my fucking Ray-Bans." Lily looked around. It was only then that she saw Hazawin, half camouflaged by patches of shadow and sunlight. She was standing between the silver birches, holding a collection of birch twigs in one hand and 2 human thigh bones in the other, decorated with feathers and beads. "You saw wolves?" said George. Lily turned to him. He was standing uncomfortably close. "I'm not sure what I saw. I thought—" George gave her a strangely humorless smile. "The forests are full of dreams, Lily. But you know what dreams are like. Some of them come true, but most of them don't." "This wasn't any dream, George. This was a nightmare." She looked around again, and then she said, "I heard a young child crying. I thought it might be my nephew, William." "We need to talk," said George. "That was why you came here, wasn't it?" He held her with a steady gaze, as if he were daring her to look away. It had only been a few days since she had seen him last, but she had forgotten how handsome he was. It was almost impossible to believe that a man so good-looking could be so ruthless. "You're telling me that was William?" "Yes, Lily. It almost certainly was." "Is he all right? Tell me. He's not hurt, is he?" "For the time being, he's fine." "What do you mean, for the time being? Where is he?" "You can't keep him. That's kidnap." "You can call it whatever you like. Personally, I call it insurance. We made a bargain, you and I need to know that you're going to keep your side of it." "You killed my sister. You killed my brother-in-law. You killed my ex-husband. You killed them. You had them torn to pieces, you bastard. You're nothing but a savage." John Sioux had been hopping toward them, but when he heard Lily say that, he stopped and held back with a wary expression on his face. But George kept up that humorless smile. "I don't mind if you call me a savage, Lily. Savage means fierce, and it also means untamed, and that to a Sioux is a high compliment. Not only that, savage comes from the Latin word silva, of the woods. And right here, in the woods, this is where my heart is, and my spirit. So, yes, you're right. I am a savage." "Where is he?" said Lily. "Where's little William? You haven't left him out here on his own." "Oh, he's safe enough. But you could search through the forest for months, and you'd never find him." Sioux said, "The Wendigo has him, doesn't he?" George didn't answer, but Lily demanded, "Is that true?" "You've seen the Wendigo," Sioux told her, "partly here, partly someplace else. If you ask me, that's where it's taken your nephew. And that's why you'll never be able to find him." "This is madness," said Lily. "What are you talking about, someplace else?" "You believe in God, don't you?" asked George. "You believe in heaven?" "I don't think so. Not anymore." "Well, let's just say that there are places which exist, but which can't be seen. Your William is in a place like that. Then I want him back. And I want him back now." You can have him back, Lily. I promise you. Give me the title to the land at Mystery Lake, and I will lift him into your arms myself. But let me warn you, I can't wait too much longer. I have to have that title by sundown, day after tomorrow. And what if I can't get it for you? Then the Wendigo will live up to its name."
"You're crazy," Lily screamed at him. "You're crazy and you're totally sick. If you so much as touch one hair on that little boy's head, I'll kill you myself."
George raised his hand. "Yelling at me won't change anything. You set all of this in motion, not me. You were the one who wanted her children back. You were the one who promised to give me the land."
"Well, I can't," said Lily.
She was so furious that her eyes were filled with tears.
"That's why I came here today. I can't get the title. I thought I could, but I can't."
She took off her glove and wiped her eyes with her fingers.
"I came to ask you if you could accept someplace else instead. Someplace just as sacred or meaningful if you know of one, but just not that particular place."
Hazowin approached them, and she looked almost as if she were gliding across the snow. Sioux hobbled 2 or 3 steps away from her. "I'm sorry, Lily. It has to be Mystery Lake. Nowhere else will do. It was there that Haoka appeared to Little Crow, and there was a reason for that."
"Aren't you listening?"
Lily retorted. "Philip Krausman simply won't give it to me. He won't even consider selling it. He says the people who are going to buy properties there, they won't want a constant reminder that Mystery Lake was stolen from the Sioux." "Of course they won't," said George. "Imagine how uncomfortable they would feel, sipping their margaritas in their backyards, knowing that the soil beneath their sundecks was still soaked with the blood of hundreds of Native Americans, men, women, and little children." "Are you looking for some kind of revenge?" Lily challenged him. "Is that why you're insisting on this particular piece of land?" "Revenge? You really underestimate me, don't you, Lily? There is no act of revenge you can possibly think of that could compensate for what the white man did to the Dua Canton. I want this particular piece of land because it's unique. There is no other location in the whole of Minnesota which has the same mystical and geographical qualities. So I can't change your mind. No. What if I call in the FBI and have you arrested for kidnap and for tearing people apart and extortion and fraud and deception? But you won't. You will bring me the title to Mystery Lake before sundown the day after tomorrow, and then we'll be quits." Lily didn't know what more to say. John Sioux limped up to her and took hold of her hand and said, "Come on, Lily. We can find a way." Lily hesitated for a moment, and then she said, "Okay." Without saying another word to George Iron Walker or Hazowin, she turned and made her way back down the slope, with Sioux following close behind her. The sun was burning the tops of the fir trees now, and it was beginning to grow darker and chillier. Lily looked back just once, and saw George and Hazowin still standing by the tree line, watching them. Sioux opened the creaky passenger door of his Buick for her, and she climbed in. But almost immediately she tried to get out again. "Try to keep it together," Sioux urged her. "We'll get this sorted one way or another." "But how can I just drive off and leave little William in the hands of people like that? He must be terrified. And this someplace else, this other existence, I don't understand that at all. Where actually is he?" Sioux started the engine. "The Sioux believe that everything that you see in the real world is reflected in the spirit world, like a mirror. Underneath the soles of our feet, there's a whole other Minnesota, upside down, except that this Minnesota is the way that it used to be before the white devils came. And there's a sideways world, too, right next to us, kind of like Alice through the looking glass. There's another Lily, sitting right next to you, and another me. That's the world that the Wendigo lives in, well, half lives in. and that's where your nephew will be right now."
"Isn't there any way of rescuing him? I mean, if the Wendigo could take him into this sideways world, what's to stop us from going after him?"
"Excuse me, but do you happen to know how to get through to the spirit world? Because I sure don't. Sideways world, upside down world, or any which way world. I wouldn't know where to start."
They drove along the bumpy track in silence for a while. But then Lily said, "There's only one thing we can do, isn't there?"
"What's that?"
"We're like cornered animals, aren't we? And what do animals do when they're cornered?"
"They crap themselves."
"No, they don't. Whatever's chasing them, however much more powerful it is, they turn around and they attack it. Meaning, if the Wendigo's hunting for us, we'll have to find it first, go after it, and kill it." Sioux stared at her for such a long time that he almost drove into a tree beside the road. Eventually he said, "We'll have to hunt down the Wendigo." When they arrived back at Lily's house, they found Special Agent Kellogg waiting for them. He climbed out of his car and came over to them, blowing on his hands to warm them up. "I'm sorry," said Lily. "I had my cell switched off. You haven't been waiting too long, have you?"
10 minutes, that's all. Mind if I come in?"
"Sure. Oh, by the way, this is John Sioux. John, this is Special Agent Kellogg from the FBI.
"Our paths have crossed from time to time," said Sioux, dryly. "How's life with you, Nathan?" "Fine, thanks, John. Be interested to know what you're doing here. Friend of the family, Nathan, that's all. Wasn't aware that you had any friends."
Lily opened the front door. Sioux said, "Listen, Lily, I have some people to see regarding that little bit of business of ours. I'll check with you later." "Okay, John. Thanks for the ride." She led Special Agent Kellogg into the living room. "Take off your coat," she said. "I'll have this fire burning up in a minute." Special Agent Kellogg unwound his scarf.
"You been doing business with John Sioux?" "What kind of business, if you don't mind me asking?"
"Nothing much. He's helping me to trace a long-lost uncle of mine. You know, so that I can tell him about Agnes."
"Oh, yes. He's a hoser, that guy. Believe me."
Lily shrugged. She hated to lie to him. But what else could she say? Special Agent Kellogg took off his coat and draped it over the back of a chair.
"I wanted to talk to you off the record," he said.
"About anything special?" He closed his eyes for a moment as if he were trying to remember something. Then he said, "This is real difficult. You've been the victim here.
But Agent Rylance and myself, we can't help but think that we're missing something."
"I don't know what you mean."
"Lily. You don't mind if I call you Lily?"
"Of course not."
"So long as I can call you Nathan."
"Sure.
But the thing is, what's really going on here, Lily?"
"What do you mean?"
"I mean that we have a jigsaw here, and there's a big piece of sky missing. And we have the feeling that you may know where it is, wittingly or unwittingly. I'm not suggesting that you're deliberately holding out on us. But 4 people have died during the course of this investigation, and they've all been killed in pretty much the same way, torn to pieces and their bodies strewn for thousands of yards. Like we told you before, we don't have any idea who killed them, or what killed them, or how. A giant eagle? A flying bear? But I've searched through the FBI database, and I've discovered that 17 other people have also been killed like that over the past 23 years. None of them was related to any of the others, and they were all killed in different parts of the country. But 13 of them were involved in kidnap or abduction cases, and the other 4 were listed as missing persons. And all of them originally came from southern Minnesota, or northern Iowa, or western Wisconsin. None of them further than 250 miles from Minneapolis. So there are strong similarities between each killing, and those similarities apply in your case too." Lily said, "I honestly don't know what I can tell you." "Well, for beginners, you could tell me what you've really been doing with John Sioux. Come on, Lily, you must know what kind of a guy he is. He's the living definition of a shady character." Lily took a deep breath. "All right," she said. "My boss at Concord Realty put me in touch with him when Tasha and Sammy first went missing. He helped my boss's brother to get his children back when their mother abducted them. But you have Tasha and Sammy back now. Why is Sioux still hanging around?" "He's been very supportive, that's all I can say." "John Sioux. Supportive. Now I've heard everything." Lily sat down by the fire, and Special Agent Kellogg came and sat down opposite her. He looked at her appealingly, and for the first time she noticed that one of his eyes was gray and the other green. "I'm going to be open with you, Lily. The rules say that agents should never get themselves emotionally involved. Total detachment from fellow agents, perpetrators, witnesses, and victims. The Bureau insists on it. But ever since I first walked into this house and saw you, well, I've been finding it real hard not to tell you how special you are." "What?" She had always thought that Special Agent Kellogg was good-looking, in a sharp-faced, loose-wristed way like a young Clint Eastwood, and he had always been very attentive, but she had been far too stressed to notice that he might have found her attractive. She didn't feel attractive. Her hair was still as fuzzy as thistledown, and she hadn't slept more than a few hours since Agnes and Ned had been killed, so she now had plum-colored circles under her eyes. "I think you're special," Special Agent Kellogg repeated. "It's just the way you look. Vulnerable, I guess, but tough with it, and very pretty." "Well, I might be vulnerable, but as for pretty, I think you need to go back to FBI headquarters and take an eye test." "Look," said Special Agent Kellogg, "I'm not trying to come on to you. I only want you to understand that I really care about you, and I don't want to see anything bad happening to you." "Is this your way of getting me to confess?" "Lily, what the hell is going on? If you can tell us anything that helps us to fit this thing together." God, she was so tempted to tell him. At least it would take some of the burden off her. But she knew that telling him wouldn't change anything, and it would probably make her situation even more dangerous. The FBI might be able to arrest George Iron Walker and Hazowin, but they would never be able to find the Wendigo, even if she could persuade Special Agent Kellogg that it really existed. Little William would be ripped apart and eaten, and then the Wendigo would come after her. "Nathan," she said, and reached out to take hold of his hands. "You've done my confidence a whole lot of good. Thank you." He shook his head in exasperation. "Take my advice, Lily. Even if you can't tell me what's happening, stay well away from John Sioux. He's trouble." Lily thought, that's exactly what I'm looking for. Trouble. Chapter 15. The next morning, Special Agent Rylance phoned Lily just after 9 a.m. to tell her that the Minneapolis coroner had released Agnes and Ned's remains and asked her if she had chosen a funeral home. Remains. The word made her feel as if she had stepped up to her chest in icy cold water, and she couldn't answer him for almost 15 seconds. In spite of that, Special Agent Rylance waited patiently on the other end of the line while she tried to pull herself together. "I'll get back to you," she said. "I really hadn't thought about a funeral." "You've seen their kids. How are they coping?" "Not too bad, I suppose, but I don't think it's really sunk in yet." "Okay. Oh, by the way, I asked the St. Petersburg police about your ex. They're holding on to his remains for the time being, pending some further investigation." "Thanks." There was a long pause, and then Special Agent Rylance said, "We're here to help you, Mrs. Blake. You do understand that? It's our job." "I know," Lily told him. "One day, well, I hope one day, that I can show you how much I appreciate the way that you and Agent Kellogg have helped me to cope with all of this. Like I say, Mrs. Blake, it's all in a day's work. Call us, if you need us, or if you think of anything that might help us. You know what I'm saying? She was beating up Aunt Jemima's pancake mix when the doorbell chimed. It was John Sioux. He was shivering and sniffing and chafing his hands together, and there was a drip on the end of his nose. "Why the freak do I live in Minnesota?" he demanded. "I must be some kind of freaking masochist. I could just as easy be a private eye in California or Florida. I could run my business from a sun lounger with some babe in a bikini for a secretary. A very, very small bikini. Here, come into the kitchen. Did you have any luck last night?" He dragged off his scarf but kept his overcoat on. "Yes and no. I talked to some of my Native American relatives. Jesus, what a crew. Most of them sound like Tonto on speed. They all knew about the Wendigo. Like, find me a Native American who doesn't know about the Wendigo. But what they knew was all mythical stuff, like how it chases you and never lets you get away, and how it comes right up behind you, but when you spin around, it's still right behind you. Nothing practical, like how to track one down and nullify it." "So none of them could help us?" "Not definitely sure yet. My second cousin Kenneth returned from Scout, said I should visit my great-uncle in Como, Thomas Bear Robe. Apparently he used to teach Native American studies at the U, and he's written books about Native American legends. So that's what I'm going to do as soon as I've had a leak and a cup of coffee, and, are those pancakes you're whipping up there?" He was still eating when Tasha and Sammy came downstairs for their breakfast. Sammy promptly sat down on his usual stool, but Tasha stayed close to Lily, frowning at Sioux with deep suspicion. "These are great pancakes," said Sioux, waving his fork. "I haven't had pancakes in a coon's age." Lily put her arm around Tasha's shoulders. "This is my friend John Sioux, sweetheart. John is a private detective. He's helping me to find out what happened to Aunt Agnes and Uncle Ned, and little William, too." "Okay," said Tasha reluctantly. She sat as far away from Sioux as she could, while Lily served her pancakes and poured on maple syrup for her. "You mustn't mind me," Sioux told her. "I know I look like I've slept in a dumpster, but I've been working all night on behalf of your mom, and all I'm interested in doing is arranging for you and your mom to have the happiest ending possible." "Mom?" said Tasha. Lily smiled at her. "It's true, sweetheart. John's here to help us." Tasha drew her very close. "But he smells," she whispered. "He smells like old carrots." "That's okay. I'll make sure that he takes a shower." "You want to take a shower, John?" Sioux wiped his mouth with a paper napkin and burped. "Sure, I'd love one. Don't want to go around smelling like old carrots now, do I?" He laughed, and then Sammy laughed, and Tasha looked up at Lily, and Tasha smiled too. Thomas Bearrobe sat in the far corner of his yellow leather couch, his bulky legs crossed, his stomach bulging over his silver buffalo head belt. "The Wendigo," he said in a deep, chocolatey voice. "Hell of a long time since anybody asked me anything about the Wendigo." He was a big, broad-shouldered man, at least 75 years old, with long, steel-gray hair that was tied in a ponytail. His eyes were so pouchy that they were half closed, and he had a prominent bump on the bridge of his nose. He looked like one of those old sepia photographs of Indian chiefs like Sitting Bull or Crazy Horse. They had driven up to the university suburb of Como under a sky that was growing grimmer and grimmer, and Lily began to feel that something terrible was about to happen. The wind was rising, too, so that snow devils whirled across the highway. Thomas Bearrobe lived in a dilapidated bungalow on a sloping triangular plot, surrounded by 75-foot pines. It looked as if the bungalow's cladding hadn't had its pale green paint refreshed since the 1960s, and there was a rusting old truck parked outside the garage, draped in a snow-covered tarpaulin. The inside of the bungalow was gloomy and smelled of stale cigarette smoke and the roast chicken pie that Thomas Bearrobe must have made himself for lunch, because the dirty plate was still on the dining table, along with heaps of newspapers and magazines and books. Thomas Bearrobe said, "My father would never say the name Wendigo out loud, because he believed that the Wendigo would prick up its ears and hear it, carried on the wind, and was likely to come after him. He always called it that forest thing." "We need to know if anybody ever caught one," said Sioux. "Caught one? Why would you want to know that?" "Because we need to catch one," Lily explained. "We need to catch it, and we need to kill it. Or send it back to wherever it comes from, or whatever you have to do to rid yourself of a Wendigo. You're a woman, and you're white. Catching Wendigos, that's not something that you should be getting yourself involved in." "I don't have a choice. If I don't kill the Wendigo first, then the Wendigo is going to kill me, and my children, and my parents, and maybe my friends, too." Sioux said, "Lily made a deal with George Iron Walker. He raised the Wendigo to help her find her children when her ex-husband took them away." "George Iron Walker. Oh, there's a man I'd keep a good distance away from. What happened?" "I couldn't keep my side of the bargain," said Lily. "I promised him a piece of land at Mystery Lake, but I couldn't get the title to it. I offered him anything else instead, money, another piece of land, but he insisted. He's given me till sundown tomorrow." Thomas Bearrobe took a crumpled pack of Camels out of his shirt pocket, shook one out, and lit it with a trembling hand. "George Iron Walker isn't everything that he appears to be. Talks like a modern entrepreneur when you first meet him. Very smooth, very friendly, all charm and white teeth. But he has a dark side to him, that one. An old side. His family goes back a long, long way to the days when men and animals could talk to each other, and whole forests could move overnight." "We still have to catch and kill the Wendigo," said Lily. "I tried to leave the country. I was going to take my children to Europe, but it wouldn't let us. It came after us when we were driving to the airport." "It'll come after you no matter where you go," said Thomas Bearrobe. He sounded completely unsurprised. "Once a Wendigo's looking for you, there's no escaping it. Ever." He blew smoke out of his nostrils, and then he said, "There are so many different stories about the Wendigo, and most of them are not true, or only half true. But let me tell you something for certain. The Wendigo is a spirit of the woods, and anything that lives in the woods, or is of the woods, whether it's a man, or an animal, or a spirit, or a tree, or any mixture of any of those four, has one common enemy. One thing that terrifies them above all things. Fire." "But I thought that the Wendigo were actually supposed to cause fires," said Lily. "Don't they swoop down and snatch hold of people, and make them run so fast that their feet burst into flame?" "That's right," said Sioux. "It's all in that Algernon Blackwood story, isn't it? Oh, my poor feet of fire. And they leave a trail of burning grass and trees all the way through the forest for miles." "That's where Algernon Blackwood got it ass-about-face," said Thomas Bearrobe. "When he was researching that story, he talked to some senile old Ojibwe up at Mille Lacs who couldn't remember half of the tribal legends. And the ones that he could remember, he was too drunk to remember straight. Apart from which, he talked to Blackwood in Ojibwe, which was translated for him by some 9-year-old kid. Like I told you, the Wendigo is afraid of fire. About the only thing it is frightened of. Not only is it a tree spirit with a close physical kinship to wood and leaves, it exists in a highly volatile state between this world and the world beside us. 2 dimensions here, a 3rd dimension there, so it's almost like a vapor. That's how it can slide into your house without even opening the door. But if you can catch hold of the Wendigo and hog-tie it and drag it along the ground, it'll catch a light eventually and burn. And it won't stop burning. And all the water in all Minnesota's 10,000 lakes won't put it out. Sioux thought about this and sniffed. So, what you're telling us is, that's the mistake that Algernon Blackwood made? It wouldn't have been the guide burning like that. It would have been a Wendigo. That's right. And you know this for sure? I mean, there are reliable eyewitness accounts of Wendigos being offed like that? No. But a chief called Red Thunder, who lived around the late 1660s, claimed he killed a Wendigo up near Fond du Lac someplace, and his account of that was written down by a French fur trader. And the story goes that a Wendigo was caught and killed in the Couchiching forest in the 1880s. Oh yes? What happened then? Well, it seems that there were 2 trappers, one by the name of Renville and the other by the name of Giddings. They were deep in the forest when they accidentally shot an Ojibwe boy, mistaking him for a deer. The boy's father was so angry that he went to the tribal medicine woman and had her send a Wendigo after them. Renville and Giddings were tracked down by the Wendigo, and it attacked them when they were sitting by their campfire. Of course, it approached them edgewise, and they couldn't see it coming. Giddings was torn open on the spot, clear back to his spine. But Renville held the Wendigo off with a burning brand, and managed to get a rope around it and bring it down to the ground and lash its arms. Then he got on his horse and rode through the forest, dragging the Wendigo behind him. Now, a Wendigo can run as fast as the fastest man, and when it isn't tethered, it can fly above the treetops. But Renville rode that horse flat out, and the Wendigo couldn't keep up with him. After 3 or 4 miles, the Wendigo's feet caught fire, and it started to blaze, and there was Renville riding hell for leather through the forest, with this fiery apparition running after him. Then the Wendigo fell apart and lay there burning, until there was nothing left but silvery ash. And that is the only known account of a Wendigo being caught and destroyed in what you might call modern times. This Renville got a rope around it and tied its arms? Asked Lily. How on earth did he manage to do that? That's one of the questions that I was asking myself too, said Sioux. All the Wendigo had to do was turn sideways, and he wouldn't have been able to see it, let alone tie it up. And I was also saying to myself, if I was deep in the forest, and I had a drunken dispute with my companion, and accidentally or purposefully killed him, how would I explain it? Nothing like blaming a Native American forest demon, wouldn't you say, of which there is now no trace, except for some ash. Thomas Bearrobe shrugged. You can either believe it or not believe it. Are these the only accounts you know of? Lily asked him. Of course not. Many tribal legends tell of similar encounters with Wendigos, but they were passed down by word of mouth, and all of them fancifully elaborated with each telling, the way these legends are. All I can tell you is that every legend and every story is in agreement when it comes to how to kill a Wendigo. You tie it up, you drag it behind your horse, and you keep going until it bursts into flame, praying all the time that it doesn't catch up with you before it does. They drove back to Lily's house. Tasha and Sammy had gone out snowboarding with their friends, the Lutmeyers, from across the street, and so Lily and Sioux had some time to themselves. Lily poured Sioux a whiskey. He knocked it back, and then he shook his head. Oh, I'm too damned old for this, Lily. Too damn tired and too damn drunk. She poured him another one. He looked into the glass and said, all the same, I'm going to do it. I got you into this fuck-up. It's my duty to get you out. They sat down together at the kitchen table. How do you suggest we go about it? Lily asked him. Well, you have a power winch on the back of your SUV, don't you? We can pay some wire out and make a loop of it on the ground and hide it with snow. Then we set fire to the woods. When the Wendigo comes out, one of us is going to have to stand there and act as bait. A Judas goat. As soon as the Wendigo steps into the loop, you put your foot down and drive like hell. That sounds to me like you're volunteering to act as bait. I'm a lot older than you, Lily. A whole lot more wore out. And I don't have 2 kids to take care of. He leaned back in his chair. All the same, I won't pretend that this won't be highly goddamned risky for you too. Anything goes wrong, you hit a tree or something, and you're royally screwed. And who knows? The Wendigo might run faster than that truck of yours can travel and catch up with you. Those stories that Thomas Bear Robe told us, they were passed on by people who survived. How many others didn't? Lily looked around the kitchen. On the dresser stood a large color photograph of the 3 of them, Tasha and Sammy and her, all dressed up in their best clothes for Tasha's last birthday. Sioux saw where she was looking and reached across the table and laid his hand on top of hers. He had a heavy silver ring on his wedding finger with a human's skull on it. Let's do it, said Lily. I'll go over to Marjorie Luttmeyer's and see if she can look after Tasha and Sammy for a few hours longer. You're sure? I don't have any alternative, do I? You realize if something goes wrong, those kids might never see you again. Lily looked at him for a long moment, saying nothing. Then she nodded and whispered, yes. They both dressed up warmly. Lily put on her thick black padded jacket with the nylon fur hood, and she gave Sioux an old windbreaker that Jeff used to wear when he went snowmobiling, and a green woolly hat. They went outside and checked the Warren power winch in the back of Lily's Rainier. It was installed under the rear bumper, with a wire cable that could pull 2,500 pounds without breaking. Most of her friends and neighbors had one, to rescue anybody who might have skidded off the highway in the middle of winter. She opened up the garage, and Sioux carried out a 5-gallon can of gasoline, which he loaded into the back of the SUV. At about 4:15, they were ready to leave. Do you have a gun? Lily asked Sioux as she steered out of the driveway. Sure I do, but I can't say that I'm America's greatest shot. And what good is a gun going to do us against the Wendigo? I wasn't thinking about the Wendigo. Oh. You were thinking about George. When we've gotten rid of the Wendigo, I want George and Hazowin to help me find little William for me, wherever he is. I just wanted to make sure that we had the wherewithal to persuade them if we need to. You bet. When I point my gun at people, believe me, they're persuaded. I think it's the wildly shaken barrel that does it. The sky was so dark that it could have been midnight. As they drove southwestward out of the suburbs, however, a diagonal streak of reddish light appeared over Black Crow Valley, almost as if a wound had opened up and the clouds had started to bleed. Red sky at night. Isn't there a saying about that? Said Lily. Sure. Something to do with staying at home, burying yourself under the bed covers and not annoying Native American spirits with a penchant for tearing people open. They turned off onto the track that led past the forest toward George Iron Walker's house. They jolted and bumped through the crimson-tinted gloom, with Sioux softly whistling Hotel California between his teeth. You can check in any time you like, but you can never leave. At last they saw the lights of George Iron Walker's house over the ridge. Sioux said, Turn off here up the hill a ways. We don't want him to know that we're here. Not yet, anyhow. He's going to soon enough, when we start our little bonfire. Lily drove the Rainier up the slope at a sharp angle, as near to the trees as she could. Then she made a 3-point turn so that the SUV was facing back the way they had come. Even though she had snow chains on her tires, they whirred and slithered on the snowy ground, but at last she managed it. John Sioux climbed out and walked around to the back of the vehicle while Lily pressed the button that paid out the winch cable. He laid the cable in a 10-foot circle on the ground, fastening it with a running cleat, so that when it was sharply pulled, it would tighten up like a slip knot. Then he took out Lily's shovel and carefully covered it with snow. Lily got out of the Rainier and went up to him. "Listen," he said. "They say that it's silent in the woods. But just listen." Lily could hear the soft rattling of branches and the fluttering of birds and all kinds of crackling and pattering noises. And very faintly, she could hear music from George Ironwalker's house, a samba, which was so incongruous that it made her shiver. "Want to dance?" asked Sioux, though he wasn't smiling. "I think we'd better just get on with it," said Lily. "Okay. You get back in the truck. Keep the motor running. I'll torch the woods, and then all we can do is wait for the Wendigo to show up. That's if it does show up. But I've got a feeling in my water about this. This is where it lives. This is where it hangs out. If we threaten its natural habitat, it's going to come after us." "I'm really worried about little William. The Wendigo has him here someplace. I don't want him to get hurt." "Lily, I really don't know. I don't understand this other reality stuff any more than you do." He hefted the gasoline can out of the back of the SUV and levered open the cap. "John," said Lily, "you'll be careful, won't you?" "Of course I'll be careful. I may be reckless, but I'm not stupid. How do you think I've survived for all of these years? You be careful, too. When I tell you to, you drive twice as fast as you've ever driven in your entire darned life and don't stop until that thing is totally incinerated. You can come back for me later." Lily climbed back into the driving seat. In the rearview mirror, she could see Sioux tramping this way and that, sloshing gasoline all over the trees. When he had finished, he came back and stowed the empty can in the back of the SUV. "Just remember," he told her, "as soon as I give you the word, you go like a bat out of hell." Then he slammed the rear door shut. Lily sat waiting, with the window open. The wind blew a soft coda to Hotel California, as if it had picked it up from Sioux and couldn't stop whistling it. She looked at her eyes in the mirror. This is all madness, she thought. But at the same time she felt a determination far stronger than any emotion she had ever felt before. She was going to finish this thing for good. She was going to protect herself and protect her children, and she was going to have her revenge on the Wendigo for Agnes and Ned. The sudden explosion of fire caught her by surprise and gave her a sick little jolt in her stomach. The chair, the kitchen, the men in masks. Within seconds, at least 15 pine trees were blazing, the flames rippling up their trunks and shriveling their branches. Sioux shouted out, "Woohoo! Woohoo! Come on, Wendigo! Your woods are on fire! Come on out, you two-dimensional piece of crap! You want to see your whole forest burn down? Wind's in the right direction, feller. Come on out!" He was right about the wind. It was blowing sharply from the northwest, and it had been rising ever since they had arrived here. The fire turned tree after tree into 100-foot torch, and as it reached the upper branches, it seemed to run from one branch to another like hordes of blazing squirrels. The air was becoming thick with the aromatic smell of pine smoke, and the popping and snapping of burning twigs was almost deafening. "Woohoo! Come on, Wendigo! Come on out!" Lily looked down toward George Ironwalker's house. As she did so, the front door opened, and she could see light shining onto the porch. She just hoped that the Wendigo appeared before George Ironwalker could get up here and discover what they were trying to do. As the pines burned more fiercely, the wind seemed to blow more strongly, too, as if it were eager to feed them with oxygen. After only a few minutes, all that Lily could see behind her was fire, and John Shook's silhouette dancing in front of it, waving his arms. "Come on, Wendigo! Come on out of there!" She glanced back down the hill. George Ironwalker's house was too far away to see him clearly, but the brake lights of his Subaru Forester suddenly lit up, and the vehicle began to back up and turn in a circle. "John!" she shouted. "John! George is coming up here! John, can you hear me?" "What?" "George is coming up here! George!" Shooks cupped his hand to his ear to show her that he couldn't hear her. Lily could see George Ironwalker's headlights now, and he was definitely headed this way. Every pine tree along the top of the ridge was burning now, and the flames were jumping 50 and 60 feet into the air. In spite of the snow and the coldness of the wind, the blasts of heat were enormous, almost enough to take your eyebrows off. Lily didn't know what to do. If the Wendigo failed to appear before George Ironwalker reached them, he would probably try to stop them, or Hazewin would if she were with him, and God alone knew what she would do. After the wolf pack hallucination, Lily was seriously frightened of her. "John!" she shouted, but he still couldn't hear her. She started to climb out of the SUV. Shooks momentarily disappeared in a great swirl of smoke and sparks. "John! George is coming!" Shooks reappeared. This time he heard her shouting and he turned around. As he did so, however, Lily saw a flicker of silvery light through the smoke. It vanished again before she could be sure what it was. "What's wrong?" Shooks called out. Lily stared into the smoke. She glimpsed another flicker of light, and then, over the rifle fire crackling of the burning trees, she heard that distinctive hissing noise. "Wendigo!" she screamed, pointing. "What?" "John, it's the Wendigo! It's there! It's right there beside you!" Shooks spun around. For a split second, Lily saw a tall figure approaching him, a figure with antlers and a long animal-like face, yet with arms that appeared to be jointed all the wrong way. It was no more than a glimpse, and then the figure turned sideways and vanished. "It's there, John! It's there!" "Back in the truck, Lily! Get ready to go!" Lily scrambled back into the driver's seat, slammed the door, and gunned the engine. She looked frantically into her rear-view mirror, and she could see Shooks ducking first to the right and then to the left and then back again. She twisted around, trying to see if there was any sign of where the Wendigo might be, but the flames were too bright, and she had to shield her eyes with her hand. Shooks was jinking around behind her like a football player, trying to find a way through a tight defense. He jabbed out his right hand and then his left, and it was obvious that he had no idea where the Wendigo was or how close. Lily looked into her rearview mirror again, and this time she saw to her horror that the figure was only 2 or 3 feet away from him. She could see it, because it was face on to her, but it was edgewise to Shooks and invisible. "John!" she screamed, banging at her horn. "John, get out of there!" Shooks turned toward her. He was shouting something, but she couldn't hear what it was. He looked excited rather than afraid. But the figure made the quickest of moves and seized him by the front of his jacket. It tore the nylon fabric apart, ripped through the kapok quilting, and then it must have gripped his rib cage and wrenched it wide open, because all Lily could see was 3 or 4 spectacular jets of blood, followed by a slippery cascade of stomach and liver and intestines. John Shooks was hauled up into the air, completely out of her sight, leaving behind him an unraveling trail of viscera. It had taken only seconds. Seized, torn open, gone. Breathless with shock, Lily stamped her foot on the Rainier's gas pedal. The engine bellowed, but the vehicle spun its wheels for 5 heart-stopping seconds before it abruptly lurched forward. Lily was half blinded by the smoke from the burning trees, but she kept her foot right down to the floor and careered down the snowy slope at nearly 60 miles per hour. The Rainier bounced and jarred and jolted, but still she didn't slow down, even when it flew over the drainage ditch at the side of the road with all 4 wheels off the ground. Bang! She hit the road, and as she did so, George Iron Walker's Subaru appeared out of the smoke, and she slammed into the side of it. There was a loud collision, and the Subaru was spun off the road and into a fence. That was all Lily saw. She was too busy grappling with the wheel to stop her SUV from skidding out of control, and when she had straightened it up, she jammed her foot down and kept on driving as fast as she dared, and then some. She veered from one side of the track to the other, her snow chains rippling on the ice. About 2 miles down the road, she slowed down and looked back. The forest was burning like a fiery flag, waving in the dark. There was no sign of George Iron Walker's Subaru, and so with any luck he wasn't following her. Her heart was palpitating rapidly and painfully, and it took 6 or 7 deep breaths before it started to slow down. Oh, John. He must have known that their plan had hardly any chance of success. But it was obvious that even he hadn't realized how quick and elusive the Wendigo was, and how easily it could pull a human being wide open. She didn't have any idea what she was going to do now. She carried on driving more slowly now, but her mind was a kaleidoscope of fire and trees and running wolves and George Iron Walker grinning at her and the Wendigo, the spirit of the woods. As she turned onto Route 169, heading back toward the Twin Cities, she heard a scraping, whirring sound. After a half-mile, she pulled over and went around to the back of the SUV. The winch cable was still extended, and it was dragging along the blacktop behind her. She went back and pressed the button to wind it back in again. Hanging from the cleat that Sioux had used to make a loop was something that looked like a man's pink and beige necktie. It was only when she tried to tug it free that she understood that it was a torn strip of John Shook's bowels. She bent over by the side of the highway and brought up a bitter tide of coffee and pancakes. Chapter 16. That night she went into the children's bedrooms, one after the other, to kiss them good night. "Where did you go today?" Tasha asked her. "Well, we went to see somebody who might know where William was taken and how to get him back." "And did they know?" "It's more complicated than that, sweetheart." "The Wendigo's not going to come after us, is it?" Lily sat down on the side of her bed. "Try not to worry. I know that everything's been really frightening, but I'm going to make sure that the Wendigo goes away and doesn't hurt anybody anymore." "How?" She smiled and leaned forward and kissed Tasha on the forehead. "I'll think of a way." If only I could, she thought, as she closed the bedroom door. When she went to Sammy's room, he was already fast asleep. Since they had witnessed Agnes and Ned being killed, both children had been prescribed Ambien tablets, and they always knocked Sammy out within a few minutes of him swallowing them. These nights, though, he never sprawled across the top of his comforter the way he used to. He bundled himself up tight, as if he didn't want to leave a single gap for the Wendigo to slide into. Lily went slowly downstairs, crossed into the living room, and poured herself a glass of red wine. She had never felt so shattered and alone. So far, she had heard no local news bulletins about a forest fire out at Black Crow Valley, nor any reports of a man's body being found in the woods. But it couldn't be long before somebody missed John Shook's. He had scores of relatives, after all, both Native American and white, and it would soon come out that the last person to be seen with him was her. She felt as if she were a Jonah, as if every person she touched was immediately cursed, and that she brought death and pain and disaster to everybody around her, especially Tasha and Sammy. Those were her own 2 children, upstairs in bed, both of them traumatized and terrified, and only able to sleep because she had drugged them. And it was all her fault. The long case clock in the hallway struck 10. Almost as soon as the last chime had reverberated, the phone rang, making her jump. "Lily?" "Yes. Who is this?" "Lily." This is George." He sounded very calm, but in a way that was much more threatening than if he had shouted at her. Lily didn't say anything. She didn't know what she could say. "You still there, Lily? Fine mess you made of my SUV today. Fine mess you made altogether, you and John Shooks. Good thing for you those trees burned themselves out. The Minnesota Department of Natural Resources takes a pretty dim view of arsonists." "John Shooks is dead," said Lily, her voice shaking with distress. "That thing of yours ripped him to pieces in front of my eyes." "The Wendigo?" "The Wendigo isn't my thing, Lily. The Wendigo is your thing. You wanted it raised. Everything that's happened subsequent to that is down to you." Lily swallowed and took a deep breath, and then she said, "Is it any use begging you?" "Begging me for what? More time? I'm sorry, Lily, but tomorrow is the last night of the moon of the snowblind, and that's a very significant date for the Duacanton. I have to take possession of that land before the moon of the red grass appearing." "I don't understand what you're talking about." "I didn't expect you to. But there are only 2 days in every year when the hunting god Hawaka can appear in the mortal world. The first day of the moon of the falling leaves, and the last day of the moon of the snowblind. These days are the beginning and the end of winter, after Hawaka lays down his hunting spear, and before he picks it up again. Hawaka appeared to Little Crow on the first day of the moon of the falling leaves, and told him that our lands would be lost when he laid his hunting spear down. And we lost them. Tomorrow is the last day of the moon of the snowblind. If we get the land back on the day that Hawaka picks up his hunting spear, the legend says that we shall never lose it again, for all time." "George, this is the 21st century. All of this is mumbo-jumbo. People have been killed." "My people were killed. Back in the 1850s. Not 3 or 4, but hundreds of them. My people. My flesh and blood. They were deceived into giving up their own land. And then they were starved, and they were hung, and they were shot. Just because it happened all those years ago, do you think we've forgotten? Or forgiven?" "George, please. I can't get the land. It's impossible." "Nothing is impossible, Lily. Not in this world." He hung up. Lily tried to call his number back, but the line was busy. In any case, what was the point? He wasn't going to listen to reason. He wasn't going to listen to begging. He wasn't going to listen to anything. Thomas Bearrobe had been right. George Iron Walker had a dark side to him. An old side. She dropped another 2 logs on the fire. She was exhausted, but she wasn't ready to go to bed yet. She hadn't asked the doctor for any sleeping pills for herself because she didn't want to fall into a deep sleep and leave Tasha and Sammy unprotected. Not that she had any illusions that she was capable of fighting off the Wendigo. The phone rang again. "George," she said, "listen." "Lil, I didn't wake you, did I?" It was Benny. He sounded drunk, and there was Frank Sinatra singing in the background, "Come fly with me, let's fly away." "Oh, Benny, it's you. I thought you were somebody else. No, you didn't wake me. The truth is I haven't slept much at all in the past few days." "I'm a little inebriated, Lil, but I just wanted to apologize for the Mystery Lake thing. I was trying to impress you and I made a fool of myself. I'm sorry. I hope we can still be friends." "You caused me a whole lot of grief, Benny. More than you know." "I didn't mean any harm, Lil. Honest, I didn't. Okay, Benny. What's done is done. Maybe I can buy you lunch? How about that?" "I don't think so. But thanks for the offer." Benny was silent for a moment. She could almost hear him swaying. "I think I'm going to hang up now, Benny. Good night." "Do you know something?" said Benny. "I was looking through the files on Mystery Lake this afternoon, and there it was, the title to that little spit of land you wanted. Well, a copy of it. Krausman had to buy it separately from the rest of the development because it was federal land. Damn shame Krausman got there first. If it had still been federal land—" "Yes," said Lily. "But he did, and he refuses to part with it. And there's nothing more that I can do about it. He's an asshole." "I know, Benny. Good night." "I always said that about Philip Krausman. He's a prime-grade USDA certified asshole. Good night, Benny." She finished her glass of wine and then decided that she would try to get some sleep. The house seemed unusually quiet tonight, although she could hear the oak tree scratching at the weatherboards. She was about to go upstairs, however, when she thought she heard the softest of hissing noises. She stopped and listened, one hand on the banister rail. Silence. Only the tap-tap-tap of the tree. But when she started to climb the stairs, she heard the hissing again. It wasn't a loud hiss, not like the air brake hissing that the Wendigo had made when it attacked them on the way to the airport. It was a sliding, sibilant hissing, as if somebody were pouring very fine sand down the stairs. She looked around. She could feel a shrinking sensation all the way down her back and a tingling in the palms of her hands. There was nobody there, and no sand pouring down the stairs. But the hissing went on, and she had a sudden, strong feeling that she wasn't alone. She made a determined effort not to run up the stairs, though she found herself climbing them stiffly and quickly. She crossed the landing and went into her bedroom and closed the door and locked it. She could see herself in the mirrored doors of her closet, and she was surprised how white her face was, and how fixedly she was staring at herself. She thought she looked like a madwoman. She listened. The hissing had died away. Maybe she had imagined it. Maybe it had been nothing more than her own blood rushing through her ears. She waited for over a minute. Then she sat on the bed and waited a few minutes longer. After a while, she decided that even if she hadn't imagined it, whatever it was, it had gone. Tiredly, she stood up and tugged off her thick cream cable knit sweater. Then she unbuttoned her black denim jeans and stepped out of them. She went through to her shower room, switched on the light, and reached into the shower to start the water running. In this house, it always took an age for the hot water to reach the bathrooms, especially in the winter. She took off her bra and her big, warm, brushed cotton pants and put on her tartan bathrobe. She squinted at herself in the medicine cabinet over the wash basin. God, Lily, you look tired. Her hair had grown over an inch now, although it seemed to be much finer than it had been before she had shaved it all off, and it seemed to stick up more. What had Benny called her? An elf. She was just about to take off her robe and step into the shower when she thought she glimpsed a flash of light from her bedroom. It was so quick that she thought she might simply have blinked. But then it flashed again and again, like a quick, quivering will-o'-the-wisp. She listened. She couldn't hear the hissing sound, but then the shower was clattering too loudly. Very slowly she reached up and opened the door of the medicine cabinet so that its mirror was angled toward the mirrors on her closet. She almost shouted in fright, but she clamped her hand over her mouth to stop herself. Clearly reflected in the medicine cabinet, she could see a tall figure standing in the corner of her bedroom beside her bed. It was hard to see exactly what it was because it constantly shifted and changed. In many ways, it was like a man. It had a human face, although its features were long and angular, and its upper lip seemed to be cleft, although that could have been the shadow under its nose. It had glittering black eyes that rapidly darted from side to side, but it didn't seem to be focusing on anything in particular. It stood upright, like a man, yet it had an arrangement of horns on its head that resembled antlers, and a deep, narrow chest that resembled a deer's chest rather than a man's. Its image wavered and jumped so that it looked to Lily like a weak TV signal, struggling to resolve itself into a recognizable picture. And, yes, she could hear the hissing sound now, like static, not much louder than before, but highly distinctive. So this is how my life ends, she thought, torn apart by a mythical creature in my own house, and nobody will ever know what really happened to me. She just prayed that the Wendigo wouldn't go for Tasha and Sammy, too. The Wendigo turned sideways and vanished from her medicine cabinet mirror as if it wasn't there at all, but when she looked around into her closet mirror, she could still see it. Its face appeared to be reassembling itself, and its body went through one metamorphosis after another. As she watched it, she began in a curiously oblique way to understand what it actually was. It was everything that made up the spirit of the woods, the men, the animals, the insects, and the flickering light that came down through the branches. The Wendigo wasn't just of the woods, as Thomas Bearrobe had described it. The Wendigo was the woods. It turned sideways again and reappeared in her medicine cabinet mirror. It was staring directly at her, and she realized that it must have seen her. Please let it be quick. Please don't let it hurt too much. Agnes was killed so fast she probably didn't know what hit her. Please let it be the same for me. But the Wendigo made no move toward her. Instead, it continued to stare at her. And the longer it stared at her, the more she felt an overwhelming sense of panic. The Greeks had invented the word panic after Pan, the wood god. Panic was the dread of lonely places like forests, the feeling of being hopelessly lost. Lily started to hyperventilate. She pressed her hand against her chest to try to control her breathing. She could feel that darkness closing in again, the darkness that came before a faint. But the Wendigo turned away again and disappeared from her medicine cabinet mirror. Lily looked quickly around at her closet mirror, but she was only just in time to see the Wendigo folding itself up like origami, except that it was made of thin rays of light rather than paper. It became nothing but a geometric pattern of light on the carpet, and then it slid beneath her door and vanished. Immediately, Lily ran across her bedroom, opened the door and ran to Sammy and Tasha's rooms. They were both asleep, untouched and undisturbed. She went back to her shower room and stood in front of the medicine cabinet for a long time, trying to read the expression on her own face. She felt an extraordinary mixture of shock and relief, but the beginnings of something else, too. A new understanding of what America must have been before white men arrived. A new understanding of why George Iron Walker wanted that land at Mystery Lake so much. It was only a vaguely formed grasp of Native American feelings, and she couldn't find any sympathy for them after everything that had happened in the past few days, but it moved her and disturbed her. She felt as if the ground had moved beneath her feet. After a while, she took off her robe and stepped into the shower. She wondered if the Wendigo had come of its own volition to warn her, or if George Iron Walker and Hazowin had sent it as a threat. There was one thing she had learned, though. With two mirrors, placed at angles to each other, the Wendigo remained visible even when it turned edgewise. With 3 or 4, it wouldn't be able to vanish at all. She toweled herself, pulled on a warm pink nightdress and went to bed, though she couldn't sleep for hours. When she did, she dreamed that she had woken up and that patterns of antlers were moving across her bedroom ceiling. "They're outside, Lil," said Benny. "They're outside and they're coming for you. I just want to apologize." When she woke up, it was 7:20 a.m. She looked in on Tasha and Sammy before she went downstairs. Sammy was still asleep, but Tasha was already tugging her jeans on. "Sleep all right?" Lily asked her. Tasha nodded. I didn't have any nightmares anyhow. Lily went downstairs and filled the percolator with coffee. The morning sunlight was so cold and brittle that it leached all of the color out of the kitchen, like a 1950s photograph. She looked out into the backyard. The snow was beginning to thaw, and where the sun was shining on their upper branches, the trees were dripping. There were paw prints crisscrossing the yard in all directions. Stray dogs, probably, looking for scraps. She looked up at the kitchen clock and thought to herself, only 11 hours to go before sunset. How am I going to catch the Wendigo before then? She knew now that if she had enough mirrors, she could see it, whether it turned itself edgewise or not. But the mirrors had to be set up in exactly the right places, and how could she make sure that the Wendigo walked into her line of sight? Even if it did, what was she going to do then? How was she going to snare it with her tow cable? Supposing the loop didn't catch around its ankles, the Wendigo would be on her before she knew it. She kept playing the scenario over and over in her mind, trying to work out a way in which she could lure the Wendigo into the precise location where she could see it, and then catch it, and then drive off with it. But, single-handed, she could see that there was no way. She just couldn't do it on her own. Tasha came up behind her and put her arms around her waist. "Mom? Everything's going to be all right, isn't it?" "Sure it is. You'll see. Maybe you should call those FBI men to help you. Like, even if they don't believe you, at least they can make sure that nothing happens to us. We'll be okay. The police are right outside, aren't they?" "I guess. But the Wendigo, supposing it gets in here without them even seeing it. Tasha, I promise you, we're going to be okay." She had never knowingly tried to deceive her children, not even when she was going through the worst of her divorce with Jeff. But this morning, she simply couldn't find the words to tell Tasha how terrified she was. The minute hand on the kitchen clock kept moving on minute by minute, and each time it moved, she shuddered. She poured herself a cup of coffee, although she felt much more like a double shot of Jack Daniels. What the hell was she going to do? There was no point in locking the doors. There was no point in trying to run away. The future was coming for her, and there was no way to avoid it, and no way to escape it. She thought, condemned criminals must feel like this when the day of their execution dawns. She watched Tasha eating her cereal, and it almost broke her heart. Tasha and Sammy relied on her so much, but she had allowed her own selfishness to jeopardize their lives. They would have been better off without her, spending the rest of their lives with Jeff, playing in the sunshine, and forgetting all about her. If only there was somebody she could turn to. Somebody strong. Somebody who could protect her. Maybe Tasha was right. Maybe those FBI agents could help her. Or one of them, at least. Special Agent Kellogg arrived at the house shortly after 11 a.m. He looked pale and pinched, as if he had been awake all night, and the cold morning air had given him a hard, barking cough. "What's up?" he asked her, doing a quick alley shuffle on the doormat to get the snow off his shoes. "Would you like some coffee?" "Sure. But you didn't ask me here for a social visit, did you?" It was that obvious. I've been a special agent for 15 years, Lily. When you called me, I recognized that tone of voice right off." "What tone of voice?" "It's a very particular tone of voice that suspects use when they've decided that they need to make a clean breast of things. Don't get me wrong, I'm not saying that you're a suspect. But you do have something to tell me, don't you?" She led him into the kitchen and took a blue china mug from the dresser. "I need your help, Nathan." He stood in the doorway. He still hadn't taken off his long gray overcoat. "Okay," he said. "What I'm going to tell you now. You probably won't believe a word of it, but then again you might, because it makes sense of everything that's happened, even if it doesn't make sense in itself." Special Agent Kellogg waited and said nothing. Lily said, "I thought maybe I could deal with this myself, but I can't. and I'm scared out of my mind." She started to pour coffee out of the percolator, but then her eyes filled up with tears, and her hand started to shake, and she had to put the percolator down on the table. "Stop," she told herself. "Just stop it." Special Agent Kellogg came around and laid his hand on her shoulder. "Think you'd better sit down, Lily, and tell me all about it." He pulled out a chair for her, and she sat down. "I'm so stupid. I'm so damned stupid. And crying's not going to make things any better." "Come on, Lily. Get it off your chest. What's been going on?" She told him haltingly about the Wendigo. She told him everything. He sat next to her, holding one of her hands, but he didn't nod, and he didn't interrupt, and he didn't ask her any questions until she had finished. "That's it," she said. "I have about 10 hours left to find the land title, or else find a way to destroy the Wendigo. One or the other, and I don't think I can do either." Special Agent Kellogg said, "That was you, then, last night? That forest fire out at Black Crow Valley? You and John Sioux?" "I feel terrible. I feel like I killed him myself." "Well, yes. But I wouldn't shed too many tears for good old John Sioux. In aggregate, I would say that more people in the Twin Cities wanted Sioux dead than wanted him alive." "Do you believe me?" asked Lily. "What? About the Wendigo? Like you said, it makes sense of everything that's happened, even if it doesn't make any sense. I don't know. I don't believe in spirits and ghosts, but then again, what else could possibly rip people to pieces and fly through the air with their guts trailing behind them? And what else could squash an SUV like a Coke can right in the middle of the highway?" "I feel so guilty," said Lily. "If it hadn't been for me, none of those people would have died. And I still don't know what's happened to poor little William." Special Agent Kellogg finished the last cold dregs of his coffee. Then he leaned back in his chair and said, "Let's suppose, for the sake of argument, that I do believe you. It's all true, Nathan. I swear it, unless I'm going stark staring mad and I've been hallucinating. Well, I saw the bodies for myself, Lily. I saw your sister's SUV. Those weren't hallucinations, those were real. Now, maybe there's an alternative explanation as to how those people were killed and how that vehicle was crushed. But right now we don't have one. So until somebody can prove different, I'm prepared to work on the assumption that there really is a Wendigo." Lily was so relieved that she didn't know what to say to him. Special Agent Kellogg squeezed her arm. "I'll help you, okay?" "Thank you. Really, Nathan, you don't know what this means to me." "Hey, I've always tried to keep an open mind. Dick Rylance says I should have been assigned to the X-Files. I warn you, though, I'll have to fly solo on this one. Dick's a skeptic, to say the least. He won't even believe that a fire's hot until he's shoved his hand in it to make sure, so I don't think he'd be too willing to go looking for Native American forest spirits. Not until he's been shown some concrete evidence. As for my division chief, he'd send me straight off for a psych evaluation." He paused, and then he added, "Maybe he'd be doing the right thing, too. Maybe you and we're both nuts." "Nathan, that thing was in my bedroom last night, and it was real." "Okay, don't get upset. Like I say, I'm prepared to accept for the time being that you're telling me the truth. What we have to do as a matter of urgency is devise a plan for getting you out of this bind, whether we persuade George Ironwalker to relinquish his claim to that piece of land, or we zap the Wendigo, or whether we think up some other way. Benny told me that he had a copy of the land title certificate. Apparently, the land used to belong to the federal government. Maybe we could persuade somebody in the government to put a block on planning approval so that Philip Krausman wouldn't want it anymore? I don't know. It could work, but you've only got 10 hours, right? And you know how long it takes to get a response out of any government department. Months, usually.
Then we'll have to destroy the Wendigo, won't we?
It looks like it. But if we're going to do that, we need to find it first. Or lure it out of hiding the way that John Shooks lured it out. And we need a really effective way of catching it when we do. That wasn't a bad idea, laying a loop of towing cable under the snow. But from what you've told me, the Wendigo is super quick. If we don't manage to lasso it the first time, you and me are going to be Wendigo chow.
Can you think of any other ways of catching it?
Special Agent Kellogg gave another cough and nodded. Back at Division, we have handheld catching nets. They use compressed gas to shoot out a net, which entraps a suspect completely.
A net? Is that going to be strong enough?
I should think so. They're made of high-molecule fiber. You can't even cut your way out of them with a knife.
He checked his watch, even though the kitchen clock was right in front of him.
Listen, I'll go back to Washington Avenue and pick a couple up. I'll requisition some high-powered ordnance, too.
So what can I do?
You stay here and try to think of a way to bring the Wendigo out of the woods so that we can snag it.
He stood up and coughed again.
Lily said,
You don't know how much I appreciate this. I was so scared that you weren't going to believe me.
It's a riff on the old Sherlock Holmes thing, isn't it? When you've eliminated the impossible, whatever remains must be the truth, even if that's damn near impossible too.
Lily almost managed a smile. She was still deeply frightened, but at least she felt that she wasn't alone anymore. Chapter 17. Around 12:30 p.m., she made Tasha and Sammy some peanut butter and jelly sandwiches and poured them 2 glasses of milk. Tasha was upstairs reading, but Sammy was out in the front of the house, sliding on the snowmobile trail with his friend Josh from across the street. Except that when Lily opened the front door, she couldn't see Sammy or Josh anywhere. She shielded her eyes against the glare from the ice and looked up the street, but apart from old Mr. Harkins clearing his driveway, it was deserted. She tippy-toed in her slippers as far as the sidewalk so that she could see the other way. And it was then that she felt the salty taste of shock in her mouth. Sammy was standing about 25 yards away in his bright blue windbreaker and his purple woolly hat. He was talking to a tall man in a black leather jacket, a man with dark sunglasses and silver chains and feathers around his neck. George Ironwalker. She stalked up to them.
"What the hell are you doing here?" she demanded. "I'm talking to your boy," said George Ironwalker. "Where's the harm in that?"
"Sammy, go indoors," said Lily.
"But, Mom,"
"I said go indoors, this instant."
Sammy reluctantly walked back to the house and went inside. "I was only passing the time of day, Lily," said George Ironwalker, taking off his sunglasses. His eyes were like stones. "You stay away from my children. Haven't you caused my family enough grief already? I'm sorry, Lily, but like I said before, you were the one who set these events in motion. So what are you doing here?" "I came to pay you a visit, to see how things were progressing." "Do you have the land title yet? No? Are you likely to lay your hands on it before sundown?"
"Look," Lily began, but then she suddenly thought, "The land title. Benny has a copy of it in his office." And she thought something else, too. If the Jew-Canton had been tricked out of their land once, maybe they could be tricked out of it again. Long enough to buy her a few moments of valuable time, anyhow. "Yes," she said. "Yes, I'll have it."
"You don't sound too sure of that."
"Don't you worry. I'm going to collect it this afternoon."
George Ironwalker looked impressed. "That's wonderful. I don't know how you managed it, but I'm very pleased. I didn't want this business to end badly, you know. I never did."
"It's already ended badly." "Will I get little William back?"
"I promise you." And when I make a promise, Lily, I keep it.
Is he safe?
Oh, he's safe. Where he is, he's doing nothing but dreaming.
You're a bastard, George.
No, Lily, I'm not. I'm only trying to make things right.
Turning back the clock 200 years? That doesn't make things right. Killing innocent people? That doesn't make things right.
Tell that to the 38 Duacanton men who were hanged at Mankato. Tell that to the 55 women and children who were shot down like dogs at Blood Hill.
It was then that she glimpsed a silvery flicker of light on the opposite side of the street. If she hadn't known about the Wendigo, she would have thought it was nothing more than a chance reflection from a passing automobile. But she saw the snow flurry up as if a sudden wind had caught it, and she heard the faintest hissing sound. "It's here, isn't it?" she said. George Ironwalker turned to look across the street, and then he said, "Yes. It just wants to make sure that everything's settled the way it should be." "Where do you want me to meet you?" Lily asked him.
"Mystery Lake. Where else? Any time before sundown. I'll be there."
"And the Wendigo?"
"Like I said, it just wants to make sure that everything's settled the way it should be."
Lily turned her back on him and walked back to the house without saying anything more. Her heart was thumping, but she was beginning to work out the rudiments of a plan. The most important thing she had learned from George Ironwalker was that the Wendigo was going to be there at Mystery Lake when she was supposed to hand over the land title. The spit of land was very narrow, only a few yards wide, which meant that she and Nathan Kellogg would have a fair chance of setting up their mirrors in such a way that they would catch the Wendigo's image, no matter if it turned edgewise or not. Everything was going to depend on timing and speed and more luck than it took to win the lottery 6 weeks running. But at least she didn't feel so helpless anymore. Back in the kitchen, Tasha and Sammy were eating their sandwiches.
"Who was that man?"
asked Sammy.
"He's nice."
"He's not nice at all. He's the man who raised up the Wendigo for me. He's the man who wants that piece of land."
"He was nice to me. He asked me if I knew who used to live here, before they built all these houses."
"Oh, yes? And who did live here?"
"The beaver people. He said it was a long, long time ago, when beavers could talk, and people could understand them. They all lived together, and everybody was happy."
"It's just a story, Sammy."
"How do you know?"
Lily hesitated. Then she said, "As a matter of fact, I don't know. Maybe he's right. Maybe beavers could talk. Maybe there really was a time when everybody was happy." Benny swung around in his revolving chair and said, "Lil, this is a surprise. I was passing. Thought I'd call in to see you. You're looking good. In fact, you're looking terrific. Your hair's growing, huh?" Lily ran her hand through the soft blonde down on top of her head. "Nowhere near fast enough. I can't wait for it to grow long enough to curl it." "How about a coffee? Or a drink, maybe? I was going to lunch in about 10 minutes. Do you want to join me?" "Tempting, but I don't really have the time. I wanted to talk to you about that Mystery Lake thing, that's all. Lil, you don't know how sorry I am about that. I didn't think you would ever speak to me again." Lily sat down on the opposite side of his desk. "Don't be silly, Benny. We're friends, aren't we? We'll always be friends. A little more than friends, I like to hope. You can't blame a fellow for wishful thinking, can you?" "Of course not. That little spit of land, you said that used to belong to the federal government." "That's right. It was kind of complicated. Something to do with the Cession Treaty of 1863. For some reason, the land on the northwest side of Mystery Lake stayed in federal ownership, and nobody realized it until Crossman Developments came to buy it up. Are you sure you don't have time for lunch? I was going to Ping's for Szechuan." "I'm really sorry, Benny. I have so much to do.
But do you think I could see that land title? I think it might be worth mentioning in our promotional material. Benny stood up and went across to his filing cabinet. You know that we really miss you here at Capitol, don't you, Lil? As soon as you've managed to put all of your family tragedies behind you, you're more than welcome to come back. That's good of you, Benny. I didn't really want to lay you off, you know that. But with all that negative feedback I was getting from the clients, what could I do? People are so lacking in human understanding, don't you think? Oh, people are unbelievably callous. He lifted out a folder marked Mystery Lake Legalistics, opened it, and took out a copy of the land title. There's nothing very special about it. It's just a plain old land title certificate. Still, I'd like to include some mention of it. I think people like to know the history of the property they've bought. Okay if I make a copy? Sure. He leaned over and clicked his intercom. Janice, do you want to come in here and make me a copy for Mrs. Blake? Thanks. While his secretary was copying the land title, Benny came and sat on his desk, very close to Lily. How are you really, Lil? You're as beautiful as ever. But I have to say that you're looking a little strained. Well, as you can imagine, things haven't been very easy. Why don't you and me start over? I'd love to take you out to dinner. Then maybe we could go to the Fine Line Cafe for some folk music. I'm really into folk music. Bet you didn't know that. No, Benny, can't say that I did. He bent forward and awkwardly kissed her on the forehead. You do things to me, Mrs. Blake, he whispered hoarsely, and managed to spit on her left cheek as he did so. She returned home just before 2 p.m., and less than 5 minutes later, Special Agent Kellogg arrived, driving a black Jeep with dark tinted windows and no license plate. He came into the house carrying what looked like a very large black flashlight. Is that it? Asked Lily. This is it. Made by Gaga Security of Korea, believe it or not. You hold it up like this, twist the safety ring in the middle, then press the butt. The net comes flying out, spread by weights. I've used it twice, and both times it was amazing. Stopped one suspect who was 6'5" and 300 pounds and going totally berserk. Lily held up a manila envelope. And this is a copy of the land title, courtesy of Benny Bergenheim at Capital Realty. Creep. Lily had asked her friend Etty Lindborg to take care of Tasha and Sammy for the rest of the day, which Tasha and Sammy didn't mind at all, because the Lindborgs owned 2 ponies and 5 dogs. She drove them to the Lindborg house, which was a sprawling ranch-style property overlooking the lake, with white-painted stables and a barn. "What time are you going to pick us up?" asked Tasha. "I'm not sure. Not too late, I promise." Sammy said, "Make sure it's after supper. Mr. and Mrs. Lindborg always have fried chicken for supper, and it's scrumptious." I don't think they always have fried chicken for supper. But, okay then, after supper. Just don't blame me if they have tuna bake. She held them close. Sammy first, and then Tasha, and she breathed in the smell of them. She might never see them again, and the thought of that was almost more than she could bear. They walked up the curving driveway toward the house, and Eddie opened the front door and waved to her. "Bye, Mommy," called Sammy. "See you later." Tasha turned around, too, but didn't say anything. Tasha knew that this was no ordinary afternoon. Lily blew her a kiss, and then climbed back into her SUV with tears in her eyes. Lily and Special Agent Kellogg spent the rest of the day preparing themselves. Lily scanned the land title on her computer and altered the name on it from Krausman Developments Incorporated to George Ironwalker, as well as changing the dates. The finished title wouldn't have deceived a lawyer, but that wasn't what she was trying to do. She was simply trying to buy them 2 or 3 minutes of time so that they could trap the Wendigo. Special Agent Kellogg took down the large mirror from the hallway and stowed it in the back of Lily's Rainier. He fastened 2 wires to the eyelets on either side of the frame, so that when she opened the Rainiers' rear door, the mirror would be hoisted up into a vertical position. He went upstairs to her bedroom and took her cheval mirror off its stand, wedging it into the back of his Jeep. He tested the mirrors by parking his Jeep at right angles to Lily's Rainier. Lily came out to watch. "Perfect," he said, peering at himself in both mirrors. "Whichever way the Wendigo turns, we'll still be able to see it. Then, pow! I'll net it, and vroom! You'll drive off with it." Lily took hold of his arm. "Do you think this is crazy?" she asked him. "Of course it's crazy. But how else do you deal with a spirit that's half in one world and half in another?" "You don't have to do this, Nathan. I don't want to be responsible for anything happening to you." "Lily," said Special Agent Kellogg, looking at her with his different-colored eyes, "I've been shot at. I've been stabbed. I've been beaten half to death with a scaffolding pole. This kind of thing, it's what I've been trained for. It's what I do." A large grayish-green cloud began to slide slowly over the sun, like glaucoma, and the afternoon grew gloomy and chill. Special Agent Kellogg said, 4 o'clock. "What time do you want to go to Mystery Lake?" "Soon. It takes at least 40 minutes to get there." "Okay. Guess this is it then." "Nathan? No need to say anything, Lily. Not until it's all over." They drove due westward on the Olson Memorial Highway, Lily in front and Special Agent Kellogg close behind. The sky became darker and darker, and a fine, snowy rain began to fall. By the time they reached the turnoff for Mystery Lake, the rain was so heavy that Lily could hardly make out the sign. The road led uphill, past a series of smaller lakes, and into the forest. It had been a logger's road originally, and it ran almost completely straight for over 7 miles, with dense pines on either side. In some places, the trees overshadowed the road so much that the asphalt was still dry. Lily's cell phone warbled. "You'll be able to build up a fair lick of speed along here," said Special Agent Kellogg. Lily was so nervous that she had to clear her throat before she spoke. "Let's hope so." At last the road rose higher, and they were clear of the trees. Below them and off to their left lay the steel-gray water of Mystery Lake. The snow-filled rain was blowing diagonally across it, ruffling the surface, and small breakers were nagging at the rocks. Lily could see the natural inlet where the marina was going to be built, and on the far side of it the narrow hook of land where Hawaka had appeared to Little Crow. George Ironwalker's Subaru Forester was parked on the very end of the spit, with its amber marker lights on. Lily followed the road around the inlet, and then turned around and backed up her SUV onto the spit so that it was facing inland. Special Agent Kellogg turned around, too, so that his Jeep was parked at right angles to her. "That's it," said Special Agent Kellogg on his cell phone. "Perfect positioning. Don't forget to leave your engine running." Lily climbed down from the driver's seat, but left the door open so that the headlights on reminder kept up a monotonous chiming. She raised the hood of her dark blue duffel coat and buttoned it up to the neck. Special Agent Kellogg got out of his vehicle, too, and gave her a thumbs-up signal. At the far end of the spit, George Ironwalker appeared from one side of the Subaru and Hazowin from the other. George Ironwalker was wearing a black, ankle-length oilskin coat, which flapped noisily in the wind. Hazowin was dressed in her usual embroidered sheepskin. Lily walked 4 or 5 paces toward them, and then stopped. George Ironwalker waited for a few moments, and then approached her, with Hazowin following him closely. "Who is this man?" he asked her, pointing toward Special Agent Kellogg. "A friend, that's all. I didn't want to come out here all on my own." "Very well. I hope he realizes what an historic moment this is." As George Ironwalker spoke, lightning flickered on the far side of the lake, and there was a low grumble of thunder. He looked up. "Portentous weather.
for portentous times. You do have the land title?"
"Yes." He held out his hand, but Lily said, "William first. I'm not giving you anything until I know that he's safe."
"You don't trust me. I gave you my word, didn't I? I gave you my solemn promise as a dua canton."
"William first. Then you get the title." George Ironwalker turned to Hazowin.
"All right. Let's have the child back."
Hazowin reached into her bag and took out her 2 human thigh bones. She lifted them up, one in each hand, and tilted her head back. Lightning crackled again, much nearer this time, and a drum roll of thunder followed almost at once. Hazowin called out in a monotonous sing-song voice, "Wendigo, I ask you to bring us the child that you have hidden. Honor is satisfied. The promise has been kept." She tapped the bones together in a series of complicated staccatos. "Wendigo, fold back the teepee of time and space. Bring us the child that you took to the other side. Wake him, lift him out of his dream, and bring him to us." For nearly half a minute there was no response, but gradually Lily became aware of a high-pitched hissing. Then she saw a nervous shuddering of silvery light close to Hazowin's right shoulder. First of all it formed diamond patterns, which danced and jumped and lit up the thickly falling snowflakes. But as the hissing grew louder, she gradually began to distinguish the outline of the Wendigo, with its long, distorted face and its gargoyle-like shoulders. She stepped back, first one pace, then another and another.
"You don't have to be afraid, Lily," said George Ironwalker, raising his hand. "You've settled your account. The Wendigo won't hurt you now."
For a split second she saw the Wendigo, clearly and brightly, face on. It had a human head, but highly distorted, with a wide jaw and a tapered forehead, as if she was lying on the ground and it was staring down at her. When she looked at it, she felt a sudden surge of dread in its purest form. She felt all the wildness and desolation of the North Woods, where animals spoke and trails disappeared, and nothing was ever what it appeared to be. She felt the terror of being human in a world teeming with spirits and illusions. "Wendigo," said Hazowin, rapping her bones yet again. "Bring us the child, Wendigo. Honor is satisfied. The deal has been done." The Wendigo turned sideways and instantly vanished. Lily couldn't see anything where it had been standing except the lake and the snow. Lightning flickered yet again, and this time the thunder burst right over their heads, so loud that Lily instinctively ducked. "Wendigo!" Hazowin repeated. "Wendigo!" The Wendigo turned back to face them again, and this time, to Lily's astonishment, it was holding little William in its arms, as if it had simply brought him in from another room. William was still dressed in the same corduroy romper suit that he had been wearing when Lily had been struggling to release him from his car seat. He looked very pale. His eyes were closed, and his arms and legs were dangling limply. "William," said Lily. "You bastard, George, what have you done to him?" But George Ironwalker said, "Nothing at all, Lily. He's been asleep, that's all." He went across and lifted William out of the Wendigo's shimmering arms, and as he did so, William opened his eyes and looked around him, and kicked his legs. "Here," said George Ironwalker, bringing him over. "My God," said Lily. She took William and held him up in front of her. William frowned at her, but he didn't cry. He was still too sleepy. "Is he okay?" called out Special Agent Kellogg. "He's fine. He seems to be fine. Let me just put him in the truck." She carried William back to her Rainier, opened the door, and sat him on the back seat. He promptly lay down sideways and put his thumb in his mouth. He still didn't cry, though Lily thought that he would have done if he had known what had happened to his daddy and mommy. "Now, please, the title," said George Ironwalker, holding out his hand. Lily took the manila envelope out of her coat and handed it to him. As she did so, she glanced quickly to his right, where she had last seen the Wendigo. It was standing edgewise now, but she could still see a faint ripple of light. She glanced back at Special Agent Kellogg, too, and tilted her head to indicate that the Wendigo was still there, and that she knew roughly where it was. Special Agent Kellogg gave her an almost imperceptible nod. George Ironwalker opened the envelope and drew out the land title. He looked at it briefly and then said, "Yes, this is the right title. Is the transfer all legal?" "Completely. This piece of land belongs to you now. I hope it brings you much joy." "There's no need to be bitter, Lily. It doesn't suit you." "You expect me to be happy? Anyhow, we're going now. Let's hope we never have to meet again." While they were talking, Hazawin had taken a small iron bowl out of her bag and set it down on the rocks. Now she produced a leather pouch fastened with a drawstring, which she opened up, tipping the contents into the bowl. They looked to Lily like small lumps of dark green wax. "You can stay and watch if you want to," said George Ironwalker. "Stay and watch what?" George Ironwalker held up the land title so that it fluttered in the wind. "Don't you understand? I needed this title by tonight so that I could call Haoka. I couldn't have summoned him here if the land hadn't been given back to the Duakanton." "I don't understand. You're going to summon Haoka?" "We're going to bring him back from his exile. No god can pass from the world of gods into the world of men unless the place where he passes through is owned by those who believe in him. When white men came here, they took possession of so much land that scores of our gods were sealed away from us forever. Haoka was one of them, even though Haoka is so powerful. But you, Lily, you have made it possible for him to return." After 4 or 5 attempts, Hazawin had set fire to the dark green lumps of wax in the bowl. They gave off thick, pungent smoke that smelled like pine. She stood up, taking out her bones again and wrapping them briskly together. "Haoka, god of blood, god of the hunt, hear us calling you." Special Agent Kellogg stepped forward. "Who's Haoka?" he asked George Ironwalker. "As Hazawin has said, he is the god of the hunt, the god of pursuit, and the god of righteous slaughter. He is the god of opposites. He feels cold in summer and warm in the winter. Duakanton braves used to plunge their fists into boiling water so that they could feel how cold it was, the way that Haoka felt it. And what exactly do you hope to achieve by calling on him? I thought that would have been obvious, my friend. Well, maybe I'm slow on the uptake, but it's not so obvious to me." George Ironwalker's face seemed to be transfigured. He was still handsome, but there was something feral about his eyes, and his nostrils flared as if he could smell blood. "We are calling on Haoka to revenge all of those Duakanton who were killed or starved by the white men. Every one of them. Every warrior, every hunter, every woman, every child. Tonight will be the night of the greatest reckoning in Sioux history. Haoka will sweep through your cities, and there is nothing that you can do to stop him. It will be like a terrible wind, which smashes down your buildings and uproots your roads and breaks hundreds of your people into pieces." Special Agent Kellogg turned to Lily. "Is this guy nuts?" Lily shook her head. "I wish he was, but I don't think so." "My God, you've seen the Wendigo for yourself." Hazawin rattled her bones again and began to circle the iron bowl. "Haoka, god of blood, god of the hunt, we have opened the way for you. Haoka, O great one, hear us calling you." "You really think this is serious?" asked Special Agent Kellogg. There was another crackle of lightning, and thunder bellowed behind the trees. But almost immediately the wind began to die down, and the snowy rain began to thin out. Lily looked around. The trees had stopped thrashing so wildly, and the surface of the lake was no longer broken with spray. She felt as if Mystery Lake were quietening itself down in anticipation of some momentous arrival. "Haoka! Haoka! Hear us, Haoka! Appear to us now and give us the revenge we have been waiting for." Lily said, "Nathan, I think we need to get out of here. Really." But she had taken only 2 steps back toward her SUV when the ground beneath their feet gave a huge shudder, as if it had been struck from underneath by a massive hammer. This was followed by another shudder and another. Small rocks jumped up into the air, and larger rocks cracked in half with a noise like rifle fire. "Haoka!" screamed Hazawin, whirling around and around. "Haoka! He who weeps when he is happy and laughs when he is sad. He who feels hot in winter and cold in the summer sun. He who boils ice water and freezes steam. Haoka, hear us!" There were 3 more devastating shudders. The first one threw Lily off balance, and she was just picking herself up when there was another and another. She stayed where she was, on her hands and knees, waiting for a 4th. But a 4th never came. "Haoka! Hear us, Haoka!" Hazawin shrieked out, but George Ironwalker grabbed hold of her sleeve. "Stop!" he shouted. "It's futile. Haoka cannot get through. He beats on the door between the worlds, but he cannot get through." He lifted up the land title in his fist. "Lily, you told me that this was legal. You said that this land belonged to me. But if Haoka cannot get through, you are lying to me." Hazawin wrenched her sleeve free. She stared blindly at Lily and Special Agent Kellogg, and her face was distorted with fury. "Now it's too late," she screamed. "This moon will pass and Haoka will still be trapped." She started to climb over the rocks toward them. She was so quick and agile that it was hard to believe that she couldn't see. She held out her bones in front of her and knocked them together again and again. "You will die for this. You will be my sacrifice to Haoka. The Wendigo will tear you to pieces and devour your body, and your spirit will go to Haoka and serve him forever." Close beside her, Lily saw a brief flicker of light. "Nathan!" she warned him. Special Agent Kellogg reached inside his coat and hauled out a massive Desert Eagle 50 caliber automatic. "Hold it," he ordered. "I have a very large gun here, lady, and it's pointing directly at your head." "You think that a gun can stop the Wendigo," said Hazawin, and spat onto the rocks in contempt. "Even if it could, how can you shoot something which you cannot see?" George Ironwalker started to approach them too. "Lily," he said, shaking his head, "you don't know what you've done." "Oh, I do, George, and believe me, I feel as guilty as all hell. But that doesn't mean that you're not going to be punished for what you've done. I liked you, Lily. I liked you from the very first day that we met. But now I have to watch you being torn apart, you and your friend here, and your children. The Wendigo will hunt down your entire family, and it will eat them all." "Wendigo!" called out Hazawin. "Wendigo!" She came nearer and nearer, clattering her bones and her purple eyes staring at nothing at all. Lily backed toward her Rainier, and Special Agent Kellogg backed toward his Jeep. Hazawin threw her head back and let out a long ululation that made Lily's skin prickle. Then she cried, "Wendigo! You can take these people. You can drag them up into the sky and feed off their flesh. The promise has been broken, and they must pay for their trickery." Lily could hear the Wendigo softly hissing, but she couldn't see it. Now and again she thought she glimpsed a dancing pattern of light, but when she looked again it had vanished. She started to breathe faster and faster, which made her feel lightheaded and giddy. She knew that the Wendigo must be very close now, but she was terrified that when the moment came for her to act, her arms and legs simply wouldn't obey her. The day went completely still. Except for the hissing of the Wendigo, there was no sound at all. No wind blowing, no lake rippling. A crow flew over them, but it flew silently, not even a fluttering of wing feathers. "Wendigo, take them!" Hazawin screamed in a voice so high that it sounded more like an animal howling than a woman. "Lily, shouted Special Agent Kellogg. "Now!" Chapter 18. Lily released the catch, and the Rainier's rear door sprang upward, lifting the mirror upright on its wires. Special Agent Kellogg opened up his Jeep, too, revealing the mirror that he had wedged into the luggage space at the back. Both mirrors showed all four of them on the lakeshore like characters seen through two different windows. In her mirror, Lily could see Hazowin screaming at her, and George Iron Walker a little way behind her in his long black oilskin, and the lake. But when she looked at the double reflection in Special Agent Kellogg's mirror, she could clearly see the Wendigo, a stretched-out creature made of restless lights and complicated shadows, with a rack of upcurving antlers and a narrow insect-like skull. It was already raising its arms to seize her, and its glistening white lips were peeling away from its teeth in anticipation of biting into her head. Lily jerked backward, jarring her hip against the side of her SUV. "It's all gone wrong. I'm going to be torn to pieces and die." Her dread was so intense that all she could do was make a hopeless barking sound, like a clubbed seal. She felt something like a huge serrated lobster claw tear into the shoulder of her coat, and another claw seize her left arm just above the elbow. At that moment, though, she heard Special Agent Kellogg yell out, "Lily!" and a sharp, pressurized crack. A fine mesh net billowed in the air above her, and the next thing she knew, the net was full of lights and antlers and pincers struggling wildly on the ground in front of her. It was the Wendigo, completely entangled. It hissed so loudly that Lily couldn't even hear Kellogg shouting at her, but she knew what she had to do. She limped to the open door of her Rainier and climbed into the driver's seat. Special Agent Kellogg ran over to the back of her vehicle. He looped the strings of the net around the tow hook, using its heavy black handle like a tourniquet to pull them tight. As he did so, the Wendigo was hissing and screaming and thrashing furiously from side to side. Parts of it appeared and disappeared as it twisted around in the net, and every few seconds its face changed, from human to animal to insect, as if it were trying every possible manifestation in its fight to get free. Hazowin and George Iron Walker were already hurrying toward them. But in her rearview mirror, Lily saw Special Agent Kellogg lift his Desert Eagle. George Iron Walker stopped and held on to the strap of Hazowin's shoulder bag to stop her too. Kellogg banged the back of Lily's SUV with his fist, and Lily slammed her foot on the gas pedal. The Rainier took off in a shower of dirt and stones, dragging the hissing, battling Wendigo behind it. Lily drove as fast as she could back up the hill toward the logging road. For a two-dimensional creature made of light and shadows, the Wendigo felt impossibly heavy. The SUV's transmission whined in protest as Lily neared the crest of the hill, and it was all she could do to keep her speed up to 35 miles per hour. In her mirrors, she could see the net slewing wildly from side to side, and now and then she saw a claw emerge from the mesh as the Wendigo tried to tear its way free. In the back seat, little William suddenly started to cry. "I want my mommy! I want my mommy!" "William, we're going to see Mommy now. But sit down, darling, please. Just sit down, and I'll take you home as fast as I can." But William continued to cry, louder and more desperately. "I want my mommy! I want my mommy!" Lily had reached the logging road now, and she jammed her foot right down to the floor. She had 7 miles of dead straight driving ahead of her, and she prayed that it would be enough to burn up the Wendigo. The Rainier's speedometer needle gradually wavered up through 40, 50, 60, until she managed to get it up to 75. After only a mile, though, she was jolted so hard that she nearly hit the windshield, and the SUV slowed down to 55. She looked in her mirror and saw that the net appeared to be much closer to the rear of the vehicle than it had been before. The Wendigo must have managed to get a grip on the lines that fastened the net to the tow hook, and it was gradually pulling itself nearer and nearer. "Oh, Jesus," she thought. "What if it pulls itself right up to the rear of the SUV? so that it can untie the net and get itself out. There was another jolt, even harder this time, and the Rainier swerved from one side of the road to the other so that pine branches rattled against the windows. William was sobbing so hysterically now that he was almost choking, but there was nothing that Lily could do to help him. 2 miles. 3 miles. The Wendigo pulled at the SUV again and again, and Lily had to struggle to keep it on the road. The pine trees seemed to be crowding her on both sides, as if they were deliberately trying to catch hold of her bumper grill and snatch at her side mirrors and slow her down. Maybe they were. After all, the Wendigo was the spirit of the forest. The Wendigo was the forest. 4 miles. 4.5 miles. In spite of the Wendigo's constant jolting and the branches flailing and clattering against the SUV's sides, she was managing to keep her speed between 55 and 60, and when she looked in her mirror again, she thought she saw smoke, just a brief blurt of it to start with. But as she passed the 5th mile, it started to pour out more and more thickly, brown smoke tinged red from her taillights. "Come on, you bastard," she whispered to herself. "Burn!" She sped through the forest, with the Wendigo tumbling behind her in its net, a kaleidoscope of lights, with smoke billowing out of it. Even before she reached the 6th mile, she saw flames. The Wendigo was ablaze now, leaving a long trail of fire behind it, and setting alight the branches of the trees on either side of the road. But even though it was burning, the Wendigo kept on jolting her. It couldn't be dead yet. And inch by inch, it still seemed to be hauling itself closer to the back of her SUV. Almost all she could see in the rear window now was fire, and in the fire she could briefly see antlers and claws, all burning, but still inching toward her. She didn't know what to do, except to keep going as fast as she could. John Shooks had told her that Wendigos eventually burned into nothing but ash, but how long did that take? She was approaching the end of the logging road now, only a half-mile to go before she hit the main highway. She kept her foot down, but she could feel the Wendigo dragging itself right up to her back bumper. She glanced around to make sure that William wasn't choking. As she did so, she became aware that something was running alongside her. At first she thought it was just a shadow, or the reflection of her sleeve in the window. But when she looked again, she realized that it was an animal, a great, brindled wolf, and it was running so fast that it was keeping up with her. She turned to the other window. Another wolf was running on the right-hand side of her, a lean gray wolf with eyes that were shining yellow. And in the darkness of the pine trees, more wolves were running, most of them on all fours, but some of them upright. She slewed the Rainier to the left and then to the right. The brindled wolf leapt up at her. She saw its eyes blazing yellow and its teeth bared, and its claws scrabbled against her door. The gray wolf leapt up too on the other side, and its body thumped against the paintwork. Now the whole vehicle shook, and she heard squeaking, grating noises. The Wendigo had reached the rear bumper and was pulling itself up onto the tailgate. It was hissing like a steam boiler that was just about to explode, and she could hear the flames roaring too as they were fanned by the wind. The Wendigo might be burning, but it could still crush this SUV, the way that it had crushed Agnes and Ned's Explorer. Then she and little William would not only be mangled, but incinerated too. Lily began to hyperventilate again, each breath whining as if she were suffering an asthma attack. The Rainier shook again, so that its suspension bucked and its tires howled on the blacktop. The Wendigo had clawed its way up the tailgate now, and she could see its fiery pincers trying to get a grip on the roof rails. On either side, the wolves were running in closer and still keeping up with her. She couldn't see how many, but there must have been scores of them, wolves or witches. She passed the 7-mile mark, and she could see lights up ahead. Maybe the wolves wouldn't chase her along the highway. She kept her foot hard down and screamed, "Come on! Come on!" And William started to scream too. Almost too late, she realized that the lights weren't highway lights at all. A huge Winnebago was blocking the entire road ahead of her, with its emergency lights flashing. She blasted her horn, but she knew that it wasn't going to get out of her way. She saw a startled man kneeling in the road, changing a tire. She saw a woman lifting her hand up to shield her eyes. She jammed her foot on the parking brake and spun the wheel all the way round. The Rainier slewed around 180 degrees, its tires all screaming in hysterical chorus. Lily heard a sickening, tumbling noise above her. The blazing Wendigo had fallen from the roof and dropped back onto the road. But almost at once, she felt it tugging at the net again. She didn't hesitate. She slammed the gear shift into reverse, gunned the engine, and backed up at high speed, with the transmission whinnying like a disobedient horse. She hit the Wendigo with a sharp crunch and pushed it along the road, its fiery claws flailing and its body sliding noisily on the asphalt, until she collided at nearly 20 miles per hour with the rear end of the Winnebago. She heard the man and the woman shouting at her, but she didn't care. She shifted into drive and sped forward again, but only 30 or 40 yards. Then she jerked to a halt, changed into reverse, and backed up again, smashing the Wendigo into the back of the Winnebago for a second time. She drove forward and twisted around in her seat, and now she could see that there were pieces of burning Wendigo all across the road, and underneath the Winnebago, too. The man was screaming, "What the fuck? What the fuck? What the fuck did I ever do to you, lady?" Then the wolves started to gather around the Rainier and jump up on either side, and Lily saw the man and the woman turn and run into the darkness. The wolves jumped up again and again, and some of them remained standing on their hind legs, stalking around the SUV with a strange, ungainly gait. The large, brindled wolf came right up to Lily's window and bared its teeth at her, fogging up the glass. Then she heard their claws tugging at the door handles, and she knew that she had to get away from them, fast. She put her foot on the gas, and the Rainier sped back the way she had come, back toward Mystery Lake. Without the Wendigo trailing behind her, she could drive much faster. And when she looked from one side of the vehicle to the other, she could see that the wolves were having trouble keeping pace with her. After 2 or 3 miles, only the brindled wolf was still running beside her, and then even he dropped back. For about a half-mile she could still see his yellow eyes shining in her rear-view mirror, and then he was swallowed by the darkness. She drove another mile or so, but little William was sobbing so pitifully that she drew over to the side of the road and pulled up. She lifted him over from the back seat and held him tight, shushing him. She could feel that he had wet his romper suit, and he was shaking with distress. There, she said. "Everything's going to be okay now. Everything's going to be fine. You can come live with me now, and we'll all be happy ever after. How would you like to live with your Aunt Lily and Tasha and Sammy? That would be fun, wouldn't it?" She felt exhausted and bruised, but at least she knew that she had succeeded in saving her family from the Wendigo. It was probably nothing but ashes now, and those poor people with the Winnebago would never understand what hit them or why. After a while, William began to settle down, and she buckled him up in the lap belt next to her. She tried to call Special Agent Kellogg on her cell, but there was no signal. She needed to drive back to Mystery Lake to find out what had happened to him. She prayed to God that George Iron Walker hadn't hurt him. He might have had a .50 caliber Desert Eagle, but Hazowin had all the powers of the forest and the spirits that lived in it. She started the engine again. "Come on, little William. Let's go find Nathan, shall we?" But as soon as she pulled away, she saw a black shape rushing at her out of the darkness. With a hideous bang and a flurry of scratching noises, the huge brindled wolf leapt onto the Rainier's sloping hood. Lily swung the Rainier from one side of the road to the other, trying to shake the wolf off. If it had been a real wolf, it couldn't have clung on. But it was gripping the lip of the hood with human hands, and it had found itself a foothold on the bull bars on the front of the Rainier with human feet. and when it stared at Lily through the windshield with an expression of utter fury, she saw that it had a human face. George Ironwalker, his black oilskin flapping in the Rainier's slipstream like a vampire. Lily kept on swinging the SUV from side to side, but George Ironwalker was determined not to be shaken loose. He beat on the windshield with his fist so that his heavy silver rings made a cracking noise on the glass, and he was roaring at her, although she couldn't make out what he was saying. She swerved wildly for mile after mile. Still George Ironwalker held on, and still he kept beating at the windshield. She tried jamming her brakes on, and then speeding up again, but she couldn't shake him loose. "Kill you!" she heard him shouting at her. She kept on driving, but she knew that when she reached Mystery Lake, that was the end of the road, and there would be no place left for her to go. But as the trees began to thin out on either side of the road, she saw 2 white lights up ahead of her. It was another vehicle coming toward her. It had to be Nathan. She switched off her own headlights. She didn't know if George Ironwalker realized what she was planning to do, but he reached inside his coat and took out a large knife with a heavy handle. He began to smash at the windshield again and again in a frenzy. The safety glass cracked all the way across, and then he smashed it yet again, and it shattered and frosted over, and Lily was left blind. All she could see now was George Ironwalker's dark silhouette and the rapidly brightening headlights of Nathan's Jeep. "God help us, little William," she said, and drove straight toward them. It seemed like forever, but it was probably no more than 10 seconds before they collided. Her windshield was filled with dazzling white light, and then her airbag burst out in front of her face. She didn't hear anything, and even afterward she didn't remember hearing anything. All she could remember was being thrown violently backward and forward, the way that Jeff used to shake her when he was drunk and angry. Then there was silence, except for the tick-tick-ticking of gradually cooling metal. She turned to little William and said, "William, are you okay?" He looked up at her, wide-eyed, and nodded. For the first time that evening, he had been shocked into silence. Lily was still sitting behind the wheel when her door was wrenched open with a loud creak. She lifted her arm, ready to defend herself, but it was Special Agent Kellogg. "Lily, you're not hurt, are you?" "My nose, that's all." "How about Junior?" "He's okay." "Here." He held out his hand to her. "Let me help you guys out." "It worked then? With the Wendigo?" "It was touch and go for a while, but yes, it worked." "Damn thing was all burned up." "The net held?" "The net held. I think I did some damage to some poor guy's RV, but the net held." "That's terrific. You don't know how glad I am to see you." Stiffly, Lily climbed out of the Rainier and helped little William out too. "George Ironwalker?" she said. "Sorry?" "George Ironwalker. He was clinging onto the hood. I couldn't shake him off." Special Agent Kellogg said nothing, but pointed to the front of their collided vehicles. She had hit his Jeep head-on, although he must have braked hard as soon as he saw her coming, because the damage wasn't as devastating as she had thought it would be. A badly dented hood and a bumper that had dropped off. But in between the Rainier's bull bars and the Jeep's front grille reared a huge black and brindled wolf, its head raised toward the sky, its eyes bulging, its bloody tongue lolling out of the side of its jaws. Its chest had been crushed almost completely flat. "Don't know how that could have happened," said Special Agent Kellogg. "Damn thing must have been dancing in the middle of the road." Lily held William close to her so that he wouldn't see it. "George Ironwalker," she said huskily. Special Agent Kellogg frowned at her. "He took off as soon as you did. So did that Native American girl. I don't know how they did it. I turned around to watch you go, and when I turned back, they weren't there anymore. It was like they'd just vanished." Lily started to tremble. "Do you think you could take us home now?" God knows what little William here has been through.
Sure. We'll need to talk about this, though. Tomorrow, if you'd prefer it. But I'm going to have to find a way of explaining all of this. He walked back to his Jeep, reached inside the driver's door, and turned the key. The engine started, and he walked back to help Lily into the passenger seat. "We could always tell the truth," said Lily. Special Agent Kellogg climbed into the driver's seat and backed the Jeep away from Lily's Rainier. The brindled wolf remained where it was for a moment, standing upright, its nose pointed toward the treetops. Then it dropped heavily onto the ground, its fur matted with blood, like any other roadkill. "The truth," said Special Agent Kellogg as they drove back along the logging road, between the trees. There was a strong smell of smoke in the air, and smoldering pine. "In my experience, nobody wants to hear the truth. They just want to hear what they're comfortable with." The next morning was the first day of the moon of the red grass appearing. It was a dull, overcast day, but much warmer, and melted snow began to drip from the roof. Lily allowed Tasha and Sammy to sleep late, but little William had woken early and wanted his breakfast.
"Where's Mommy?" he asked her. "Is Mommy coming?"
"Soon, sweetheart."
How do you tell a 2-year-old boy that he's never going to see his mommy or his daddy ever again? He doesn't even understand the idea of heaven. But when Tasha and Sammy came down, they both played with him and made him laugh. Lily stood and watched them, drinking her decaf, and wondered where William had actually been in the time when the Wendigo had taken him. Asleep, George Ironwalker had told her. Dreaming. But where? Even though she had seen the Wendigo for herself, she still found it difficult to think of other existences beneath our feet or beside us, especially if it were possible to move from one to the other as simply as walking from one room into the next. Shortly after 11 a.m., Special Agent Kellogg came by. He was wearing a brown tweed sport coat and a black roll-neck sweater, and apart from a large crimson bruise on his left cheek, he looked relaxed and well and smelled of Boss aftershave. "How are you feeling?" he asked her. "Good. Better. Relieved. And you?" "Well, not too bad. I had to come up with some cock-and-bull story about suspecting that George Ironwalker was involved in kidnapping little William and that they wanted to negotiate a ransom with you. The police will want to talk to you later, and Children's Services. But I've told them that you gave me some really heroic help, so I don't think that you'll have any serious problems." He smiled. "And that's true. You were a heroine. You were amazing. I was scared half to death." "That's what makes you all the more of a heroine." Lily sat down on the couch next to him. "I still can't really believe that it happened." "Oh, it happened all right. I went back to Mystery Lake late last night and had your SUV removed by a tow truck. George Ironwalker's, too. I also talked to those people whose RV you totaled. Fortunately, they didn't really understand what they were looking at. They simply thought your truck was on fire and you were panicking." "What about the Wendigo? Any sign?" "Ash. That's all I saw. And what was left of my net." "How about the wolf?" "Gone. Some predator probably dragged it off for a late supper. I promise you, Nathan, that wolf was George Ironwalker. He could change his shape. Maybe it was some kind of hypnosis, but he could do it. Well, I'll be going out to his place in Black Crow Valley this afternoon. If George Ironwalker is still there, alive and kicking, we'll know different. But if he isn't, who knows? Maybe he was a wolf. If he is there, will you be charging him? What with? Reckless endangerment with a Native American tree spirit?" "Nathan, he was going to have us all slaughtered." Special Agent Kellogg took hold of her hand and squeezed it. "I know, Lily. But even if he is still alive, I doubt that he'll be coming after you again. I think all the scores have been pretty much settled, don't you?" "I hope so. What about you? Have you thought what you're going to do?" Lily shrugged. I don't know. For starters, I have to take care of little William. I may have to look after his brother and sister, too.
Hell of a houseful.
I know. I started off trying to get 2 children back, and now it looks like I'm going to have 5. Guess I can give you a hand. I come from a family of 7. I know all about looking after little kids. Nathan, that's an offer I might very well take you up on. That night, after she had put little William down and Tasha and Sammy had gone to bed, Lily poured herself a large glass of red wine, put her feet up by the fire, and tuned her TV to Sleepless in Seattle. For one reason or another, she had never seen it before, and she felt like watching something silly and romantic. She felt as if her whole life had been turned inside out. Not only had she lost Agnes and Ned and Jeff and seen John Shooks killed, but she could never look at the world in the same way again. She would always feel that there was another country, an older country that was populated by spirits and wonder workers and animals that could change their shape. She knew that it was very close beside her, but she would never be able to see it, because it was always edgewise on. She stifled a yawn. She really needed a good night's sleep. But she was just about to get out of her chair when she thought she heard a clicking noise like the front door being unlocked. She stood up, switched off the television, and listened. Nothing. She must have imagined it. Now that the snow was melting so fast, the house was full of creaks and cracklings and sudden shifting sounds. All the same, she decided to fasten the chains and the bolts on the front door and set the alarm for the night. She went out into the hallway and listened again. She had the strongest feeling that there was somebody close by, somebody watching her, somebody trying to suppress their breathing. "Tasha?" she called. "Sammy?" No reply. She shrugged to herself and crossed the hallway to the front door. She was annoyed to see that it wasn't quite closed properly. Oh, those kids. They rushed in and out of the house every 5 minutes, and they were always leaving the doors open. But she was just about to go over and close it when all of the lights went out. She turned around, her skin prickling. "Who's there?" she demanded. Still there was no reply. "I'm warning you. This house is connected directly to the police station, and all I have to do is push one button." Gradually her eyes were becoming accustomed to the gloom. As they did so, she realized that somebody was standing in the kitchen doorway, a tall, dark figure with an arrangement of horns on its head that looked like antlers. It stood perfectly still and made no sound at all. "Who are you?" said Lily. "Get out of my house right now." The figure moved toward her. Then it spoke in a harsh Minnesota accent. "You don't remember me, Mrs. Blake? You and me? We have some unfinished business." "You get the hell out of my house," said Lily. "You get out and you never come back." The figure came closer. "I don't know how you escaped the divine retribution that you so justly deserved, Mrs. Blake. But when I found out that you were still alive, I was sorely vexed, believe you me. Especially since it turned out that you really are a witch after all. What you did to my friend, what you did to my office, what you did to your ex-husband. Witchery, that's all plain and simple. Fortunately, I still have the key that your ex-husband gave me before." "Victor Quinn," said Lily. "You sad, miserable excuse for a human being." "Oh, you think so? Well, let me tell you something. You are the spawn of Satan himself, and I'm going to make sure that you never again have the opportunity to wreak the kind of destruction that you wreaked on those 2 innocent men whose only crime was that they wanted to be reunited with their own flesh and blood. But we're going to see some flesh and blood now, Mrs. Blake, and that flesh and blood is going to be yours." Lily hesitated, fainted, and then she made a dash for the alarm panel beside the front door. But Victor Quinn was quicker. He seized her wrist just as she was about to push the panic button and twisted her arm around behind her back, so fiercely that her hand was forced right up between her shoulder blades. Then he clamped his other hand over her mouth, gripping her jaw. She could smell the same reek of tobacco that she had smelled on him before, tobacco and stale sweat. "Got your kids back, didn't you, Mrs. Blake? But only through witchery. And now they're going to be orphans, which is your fault entirely." Lily struggled and kicked and tried to bite his hand, but Victor Quinn frog-marched her into the kitchen and forced her to sit down on a chair. He dragged a black rag out of his pocket and gagged her with it, tying it in a painfully tight double knot at the back of her head. Then he produced 2 military-style belts, khaki webbing with brass buckles, strapping one around her arms and her upper body and the other around her ankles. "I can't believe this is happening. Not again. Not the same nightmare repeating itself. I destroyed the Wendigo. Don't tell me I'm going to die like this." Victor Quinn switched on the kitchen lights. This time he hadn't bothered with the transparent plastic mask that he had worn before. He had a plain, pasty face with pale blue eyes and a bulbous nose. The devil's horns on his head were nothing but sticks, fastened with adhesive tape. Lily thought, "You could be anybody. I could have passed you in the street 100 times and I never would have noticed you." Victor Quinn reached under the kitchen table and hefted up a red plastic gasoline container. "This time we're going to do it right. This time we're going to make sure that you start burning and keep on burning until there's nothing left of you but ashes." He unscrewed the cap, and without any ceremony he sloshed the gasoline all over Lily's head, soaking her. Her eyes smarted, and the stench was so strong that she almost vomited behind her gag. Victor Quinn took out a plastic cigarette lighter and flicked it into flame. "So where'd you like me to apply this, Mrs. Blake? Feet? Hair? How about the tip of your witch's nose?" Lily could only struggle against the straps and grunt at him. "There are children in the house. For God's sake, even if you kill me, think of the children." "I think the hair is good. That way you'll burn like a candle." He reached forward, holding out the cigarette lighter at arm's length and pulling back his coat cuff with the other hand so it wouldn't be scorched when Lily burst into flame. "Oh, God, please don't let this hurt too much." There was a deafening bang. Victor Quinn flew sideways as if somebody had seized him by his coat collar and flung him onto the floor. He lay behind the kitchen table, and all that Lily could see of him was his feet shuddering. Special Agent Kellogg came into the kitchen, holding his Desert Eagle with both hands. He stepped over to Victor Quinn and peered down at him. Then he holstered his gun and came back to Lily. He tugged off her gag, unfastened the webbing belts, and helped her to stand up. "Is he dead?" asked Lily. She didn't want to look at him. "Unless he can live for the rest of his life with half of his head missing, I would say so." "It's Victor Quinn. It's the man from Flame, the one who tried to burn me before." "Looks like he got what he deserved, then." "How did you—" "Thank God you did. I came around to tell you about your SUV and some other stuff about children's services. The door was open, and I know how freaky you are about security. Come on, Lily, let's get you out of here. You need to wash that gas off." She was shaking so much that Special Agent Kellogg almost had to carry her upstairs. They were only halfway up when Tasha came out of her room in her pink-striped pajamas. "Mommy, what's happening? I heard this really loud bang." Sammy's door opened and Sammy came out. "I heard a really loud bang, too." "Mommy, you smell like gasoline. What's going on?" Lily climbed the last few stairs to the landing. "I'll tell you what. I'm going to take a shower and change my clothes. Something nasty has happened and I don't want you to go downstairs. But I promise you this. Nothing nasty is ever going to happen to us again. We're safe now." She turned to Special Agent Kellogg. "Your mom's right," he said. "I have a couple of calls to make, then I'll come upstairs again and make sure you're okay." Lily went into her bathroom, stripped off her gasoline-soaked sweater and pants, and reached in to turn on the shower. As she did so, she looked into the mirror over the wash basin, the same mirror in which she had seen the Wendigo. She didn't smile. She had no expression at all. She looked like a different person. In the early hours of the morning, while it was still dark, she suddenly sat up in bed. Something had woken her, and she didn't know what. She sat there, listening for almost a minute. Then, somewhere in the neighborhood, she heard the high, eerie howling of a wolf. That was Edgewise by Graham Masterton, read by Susie James.
Audible hopes you've enjoyed this program.